Another all-nighter. I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop screen, the words for my sociology paper refusing to come. The coffee had turned cold hours ago. My room was a mess of textbooks and empty chip bags, the four walls of my dorm feeling smaller with every passing minute. At least my new mirror made the place look a little less like a prison cell. I'd found it on some online marketplace, a cheap, antique-looking thing with a heavy, dark wood frame. It leaned against the wall opposite my desk, making the small space feel a tiny bit bigger. I rubbed my eyes and leaned back in my chair, scrolling mindlessly through some social media feed. Just for a second, a little break. That's when I saw it. The tiny green light next to my laptop's webcam blinked once, a quick, deliberate flash. Then it was gone. I frowned. Stupid glitch. This old laptop was falling apart. Without a second thought, I tore a corner off a sticky note and pressed it firmly over the lens. Problem solved. I turned back to the blank document, the blinking cursor mocking me. 3 hours and 200 words later, a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. An email. The sender was a random string of letters and numbers. I almost deleted it. Probably spam. But the subject line caught my eye. Nice study setup. My stomach did a little flip. Just a weird coincidence, probably. I clicked it open. There was no text. Just a single image, filling the screen. It was a picture of me. Sitting right here, at this desk. My head was in my hands, my hair a mess, the glow of the screen lighting up my tired face. It was taken from the low, direct angle of my laptop's webcam. And in the top right of the image, I could see my own hand reaching up with a torn piece of yellow paper. It was the exact moment before I covered the lens. My breath hitched. My heart, which had been beating in a slow, tired rhythm, suddenly slammed against my ribs. I shot up from my chair, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. My eyes were glued to the little yellow square stuck over my webcam. It was still there, sealed tight. This wasn't a glitch. This was a message. Somebody had been watching me. The initial annoyance I felt was quickly being swallowed by a rising tide of cold, sharp fear. Who? How? My roommate was gone for the weekend. The dorm was mostly empty. My hands started to shake. I had to cut them off. The internet. That was the only way. I lunged for the wall, fumbling with the Ethernet cable, my fingers clumsy and slick with sweat. I ripped it from the port. The Wi-Fi icon on my taskbar was next. I clicked it, spamming the disconnect button until the little bars went gray. Cut off. They were cut off. My phone, lying face down on my bed, buzzed against the comforter. The sound made me jump. I stared at it. It couldn't be. Slowly, I walked over and picked it up. An unknown number. One new message. My thumb trembled as I swiped the screen open. Why'd you turn it off? Still here. No, this wasn't happening. My blood ran cold. The message wasn't a question. It was a statement, a declaration of power. I could disconnect my laptop, but they were still connected to me. I spun around, my eyes darting frantically around the small room. The curtains. The window looked out onto the empty quad. I scrambled over, yanking the thick fabric shut, plunging the room into near darkness, lit only by my laptop screen and the dim overhead light. I leaned against the wall, my breathing ragged. I had to lock the door. I stumbled towards it, my hand closing around the deadbolt. I twisted it. The heavy clunk of the lock sliding into place was the loudest sound I had ever heard. A small bit of security. A thin piece of metal. My phone buzzed again in my hand. It felt like an electric shock. Locks won't stop me. My knees felt weak. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, the phone clutched in my fist. They could see me. They could see everything. When I pulled the curtains, when I locked the door. But how? There were no other cameras. I had lived in this room for 8 months. I knew every crack in the paint, every stain on the carpet. There was nowhere to hide a camera. My gaze swept the room one more time, desperately searching for an answer. The desk, the bed, the closet, the old mirror leaning against the wall. The mirror. The thought froze in my mind. It was the only new thing. My mind was screaming. It was a prank. It had to be a prank from someone down the hall, someone who had hacked the building's Wi-Fi. That was it. It had to be. But the text messages, the timing, panic took over. I couldn't think. I just had to hide. I threw the phone onto the bed as if it were a venomous snake and scrambled for the closet. I pulled the door open, squeezed myself inside between my hanging coats and winter jackets, and gently pulled the door shut until only a sliver of light remained. I held my breath. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, so loud I was sure anyone in the room could hear it. The air was thick with the smell of laundry detergent and dust. Outside the door, there was nothing, just silence. A heavy, complete silence that was somehow worse than the buzzing phone. It was a listening silence. A waiting silence. Then I heard it. Click. The sound was tiny, familiar. The sound of a mouse button being pressed. It came from my desk. From my laptop. But that was impossible. The internet was off. The cable was lying on the floor. It couldn't be controlled remotely. It just couldn't. It meant someone was at my desk. Right now. My body went rigid. I clamped a hand over my mouth to stifle the scream rising in my throat. My eyes were wide in the darkness of the closet, staring at the thin crack of light. Click. Again. A double click this time, confident, casual, as if someone was opening a file. Then silence again. The silence stretched. 1 minute. 2. It felt like an eternity. My lungs burned. My muscles ached from the tension. The silence was absolute. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Was I losing my mind? Had the stress of finals finally broken me? The thought was almost a comfort. I preferred being crazy to this. Slowly, carefully, I let my breath out in a silent stream. My hand, shaking, pushed the closet door open just an inch more. I peered out. The room was exactly as I had left it. The empty chair was pushed in. The laptop screen glowed, displaying the email with the picture of me. The Ethernet cord was still unplugged on the floor. Nothing was out of place. No one was there. A wave of dizzying relief washed over me. I'd imagined it. The stress, the caffeine, the paranoia. I'd just freaked myself out. I almost laughed. A hysterical, choked sound. I was an idiot. I took a deep, shaky breath to steady my nerves, my eyes still scanning the empty room. My gaze fell upon the new antique mirror. My own reflection stared back at me, a pale, terrified face peeking out from a closet. And then I saw the rest of the reflection. The mirror showed me my room, a perfect copy in reverse. The bed with the phone on it, the desk with the glowing laptop screen, the empty chair. Except the chair wasn't empty. In the reflection, a figure was sitting in it. A dark, solid shape, its form indistinct, its features lost in shadow. It was perfectly still. Its back was to me, to where I was hiding in the closet. It was hunched forward slightly, looking intently at the laptop screen, just sitting there, as if it had been there the whole time. My head was pounding. The first thing I registered was the rough texture of the closet carpet against my cheek. The stale smell of winter coats and forgotten shoes filled my nostrils. My neck was stiff, a sharp pain shooting down my spine when I tried to move. Light. A thin, bright line under the closet door. It was morning. I pushed myself up, my limbs screaming in protest. My body felt like it had been run over. I must have passed out. Passed out from fear, from stress, from seeing, what, a shadow in a mirror? My logical brain, now reactivated by the safety of daylight, was already at work, building walls against the memory. It was finals week. I'd pulled an all-nighter. I'd had 3 cups of coffee and hadn't eaten a real meal in a day. The picture, the texts, a sick prank. Hackers. Some tech nerd down the hall with a twisted sense of humor. The figure in the mirror? A shadow. A hallucination. A trick of the light on a tired mind. It had to be. The alternative was unthinkable. "Get it together, Lynn," I muttered, my voice a dry rasp. I stumbled out of the closet, blinking in the morning sun streaming through the window I'd left uncovered. The room was just a room. A messy dorm room. My chair was empty, pushed away from the desk. The laptop screen was black. The Ethernet cable was still a dead snake on the floor. Everything was normal. See? Normal. A hot shower. That's what I needed, to wash the grime and the fear away, to reset. I grabbed a towel and my toiletries, my eyes deliberately avoiding the antique mirror leaning against the far wall. I didn't want to look at it. I didn't want to test my newfound logic. I just wanted to feel the hot water scald the phantom crawling sensation off my skin. In the small, private dorm bathroom, I turned the shower on full blast. The steam filled the tiny space, fogging the small mirror over the sink. Good. I didn't want to see my own reflection. As the water hammered against my back, I closed my eyes and tried to force the panic down. I started humming, a quiet, tuneless little melody at first, then coalescing into something familiar. A song my mom used to sing to me when I was little and couldn't sleep. An old folk lullaby, something obscure and personal. It was our secret weapon against nightmares. The notes were a comfort, a shield made of memory. It's just stress, I told myself, the words lost in the roar of the water. You're just tired. I stayed under the spray until my skin was red and the hot water started to run cold. Turning it off, the sudden silence of the bathroom was thick and heavy. I toweled off quickly, my movements brisk, efficient. I was in control. I was fine. I wrapped the towel around myself, took a deep breath, and opened the bathroom door. I stepped back into my room. Music was playing. It was quiet. Tinny. Like it was coming from a cheap speaker. My eyes snapped to my desk, to the small black Voxia smart speaker I used for podcasts. It was supposed to be off. Unplugged, even. I was sure I had unplugged it yesterday. But the little blue light on its base was glowing. And the music. My blood turned to ice. It was the song. The lullaby. The one I was just humming in the shower. The quiet, obscure melody that only my mother and I knew. It wasn't a popular song. It wasn't on any playlist. It was a half-forgotten tune from a different time. And it was playing in my room. Voxia, stop, I commanded, my voice tight. The music continued, the simple melody now dripping with malice. Voxia, shut up! Stop music! I yelled, my voice cracking. It ignored me. The simple folk tune kept playing, a cheerful, horrifying loop. It was a violation. An impossibility. A direct answer to a thought I'd had in a sealed, soundproofed room. Panic clawed its way up my throat. I lunged at the desk, my hands shaking, and ripped the power cord from the back of the speaker. The music cut off. The room plunged back into silence. I stood there, panting, the useless cord clutched in my fist. A victory. I had stopped it. It was a glitch, a horrifying, impossible glitch, but I had stopped it. Then my phone, lying face down on my desk where I'd left it, buzzed once. And then its speaker crackled to life. The lullaby picked up exactly where the Voxia had left off. The same tinny, awful sound now coming from the tiny speakers of my phone. No, this wasn't a glitch. This was a siege. I grabbed the phone. The screen was black. I mashed the power button, the volume buttons. Nothing. It was completely unresponsive. The music kept playing, a nursery rhyme from hell. Then, the black screen flickered. White text appeared, typed out letter by letter, as if by an invisible hand. Don't you like your mom's song, Lynn? My name. It knew my name. It knew my mom's song. My mind, the very last private place I had, was not safe. The final wall had been breached. The last bit of rationalization crumbled into dust. This wasn't a hacker. This wasn't a prank. This was something else. Something that could hear my thoughts. The fear was so total, so absolute, it burned. And then, something else ignited underneath it. A hot, furious rage. The sheer violation of it. The audacity. It was in my head. It was using my mother, my memories, against me. Get out! I screamed, the sound tearing from my lungs. It wasn't a scream of fear anymore. It was a roar of defiance. Get out of my head! My arm moved on its own. Pure, primal instinct. I drew back and hurled the phone with all my strength. It flew across the room and smashed against the brick wall with a sickening crunch of plastic and glass. The music died instantly. The phone fell to the floor in a spray of broken pieces. Silence. A beautiful, welcome, absolute silence. I stood there, chest heaving, my arms still tingling from the force of the throw. I had done it. I had destroyed it. I had fought back. A giddy, hysterical sense of triumph washed over me. I had won. Maybe it was just a phone. Maybe it was just a speaker. But I had smashed the voice. I had made it stop. I stared at the wreckage on the floor, a wild smile spreading across my face. I was the one in control now, and in that perfect, hard-won silence, the music started again. It was different this time, warped, distorted. The melody was slow and drawn out, like a music box winding down, the notes sour and wrong. It was a dirge, a mocking, triumphant funeral song. My smile vanished. My head snapped up. My eyes darted around the room, a frantic, desperate search. Not the Voxia. Its cord was still in my hand. Not the phone. It was a dead, shattered husk on the floor. Not the laptop. Its screen was black. There was no other source. No other device. The music grew louder, the warped notes scraping at my ears, filling the small room. It wasn't coming from any one place. It seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. I spun in a circle, my hands clamped over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head. No, not inside. It was coming from somewhere. My wild eyes finally fell on the one new thing in my room. The one thing I had avoided looking at. The antique mirror. My gaze locked onto it. The dark wood frame. The smooth, reflective surface showing me my own terrified face. The music swelled, the discordant notes vibrating through the floorboards, through the very air. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a trick. The sound was coming from the mirror. It was bleeding from the glass itself. It was emanating from the old, dark wood, a low, guttural vibration that I could feel in the fillings of my teeth. The mirror was singing my mother's song. Sleep was a foreign country I'd been exiled from. I sat on my bed, knees pulled to my chest, a fortress of one. My eyes were fixed on the corner of the room, on the tall, antique mirror. It was covered now, shrouded by the thick, gray, university-issued blanket I'd ripped from my bed. A pathetic shield, but it was all I had. It didn't stop me from feeling it, though. A low hum of wrongness that seemed to seep from the wood. A silence that felt louder than the music it had vomited out hours ago. My phone was a dead weight in my hand. A new phone. I'd had to go to the campus store and buy a cheap, prepaid brick first thing in the morning after my old one had become a modern art installation of shattered glass and plastic. I'd spent the day in the library, surrounded by people, trying to pretend the concrete walls and fluorescent lights could protect me. They couldn't. The feeling of being watched never left. Now, back in the room, the silence was my enemy. I pressed the call button. It rang twice before Kevin picked up. "Hey, you?" His voice was warm, a distant comfort. "Figured you'd be cramming. You get that new phone set up okay?" "Yeah, it's a phone." I hugged my knees tighter. "Kevin, I can't stay here tonight." A sigh. I could hear the smile in his voice, the patient, slightly condescending smile I usually loved. Tonight, it grated on me. "Lynn, we went over this. It's finals week. You're running on fumes. You smashed your phone. You think a mirror is singing to you." It wasn't thinking, Kevin. It happened. "This place isn't safe." My voice was thin. I hated how it sounded. Weak. "Babe, it's a dorm room. A single. The doors lock automatically. You have a new RA on your floor who checks the hall every hour. Who could even get into your room?" It was a stress dream. A really, really bad one. My eyes flickered to the blanket-covered mirror. It felt real. Everything feels real when you haven't slept in 2 days. Just try and get some rest. Turn on some music, put on a movie, drown it out. It's all in your head, I promise. I didn't say anything. What was the point? He wasn't here. He couldn't feel the room's texture changing, the air growing thick. "I'll call you in the morning, okay?" he said, his tone shifting to finality. "Get some sleep. Love ya." "Yeah," I mumbled. "Love you too." The line went dead. I was alone again, just me and the shrouded thing in the corner. He was right about one thing. It was all in my head. That was the problem. It had gotten in. I sat there for maybe an hour. Maybe 2. Time had warped into a thick, syrupy mess. I just stared at the blanket, my ears straining against the silence, trying to catch the first hint of that awful, distorted lullaby. Then, a sound. Knock. 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 3 sharp, distinct raps on my door. My entire body went rigid. Every muscle locked. My heart didn't just beat. It slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. I wasn't expecting anyone. Kevin was in his own dorm across campus. Nobody visited this late, especially not during finals. My feet hit the cold floor without a sound. I moved like a predator, or prey. I wasn't sure which. Each step was deliberate, silent. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the peephole, my breath hitched in my throat. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a shallow breath, and then looked. The hallway was empty. The familiar, vomit-yellow walls stretched out under the flickering fluorescent light. A flyer for a campus a cappella group was taped crookedly to the opposite wall. Nothing. No one. A prank? Some asshole from down the hall? I unlocked the deadbolt. The click was deafening. I turned the knob slowly, pulling the heavy door inward, just a crack. The empty hallway stared back. I was about to shut it, my mind already writing it off as my frayed nerves playing tricks on me, when I looked down. A white styrofoam takeout box sat on the welcome mat. I stared at it. A small white rectangle in the middle of the worn carpet. A sticky note was plastered on top, the handwriting a cheerful, loopy cursive. For Lynn. Eat something, you're too stressed. Love ya. Love ya. The same 2 words Kevin had just said. My blood ran cold. He couldn't have gotten here this fast. It was a 20-minute walk. He didn't have a car on campus. It was impossible. My hand trembled as I picked up the box. It was still warm. I brought it inside, locking the deadbolt again, the sound now a small comfort. I put the box on my desk, my eyes scanning the note. It was Kevin's phrase, but it wasn't his handwriting. His was a messy, slanted scrawl. This was neat. Perfect, almost. Who the hell knew he said that to me? My curiosity got the better of my fear. I peeled the lid off the box. A wave of steam hit my face, carrying a smell that made my stomach turn. It was pad see ew. Wide, flat noodles slick with a dark, oily sauce. Dotted with limp broccoli and mushrooms, piles of them, little slimy brown slices of shiitake. I hate mushrooms. I don't just dislike them, I despise them. The texture makes me gag. Kevin knew this better than anyone. He once ordered a pizza with mushrooms by mistake, and I made him eat his half in the hallway. It was a running joke. This wasn't a gift. This was a statement. A message encoded in noodles and fungus. I know your boyfriend's pet name for you, but I also know what you hate, and I'm giving it to you anyway. My phone was in my hand before I even realized I'd reached for it. I hit Kevin's number on speed dial. He answered on the first ring, his voice groggy. Lynn? What's wrong? Did you just send me food? I demanded, my voice a harsh whisper. What? No, I'm in bed. I was almost asleep. What food? Someone just left food outside my door. A note on it said, "Love ya." There was a pause on the other end. The grogginess in his voice vanished, replaced by a sharp edge of alarm. What do you mean? Someone left food? Who? I don't know. I looked through the peephole and nobody was there. It was just on the mat. I started pacing, the styrofoam box on my desk feeling like a bomb. Kevin, someone is fucking with me. Okay, just stay calm, he said, but I could hear the panic seeping into his own voice now. Is the door locked? Yes, it's locked. Don't open it. For anyone. You hear me? I'm not an idiot, Kev. That's when I heard it. K-R-R-R-T. A faint sound. Small. Like a mouse chewing on a wire. I stopped pacing. I held my breath. Lynn? Are you there? Kevin's voice was a tiny, distant buzz in my ear. K-R-R-R-T. K-R-R-R-T. It was coming from the door. A slow, rhythmic scratching. Metal on wood. A key, maybe? A knife tip? It was deliberate. Patient. It wasn't the frantic scraping of an animal. It was human. It was still out there. It hadn't left. It had waited. It had knocked, left the package and hidden. It had watched me take it, and now it was back at the door. It knew I was in here. It knew I was on the phone. It knew I was listening. Someone's at the door. I breathed into the phone, my knuckles white from gripping it. They're scratching at the door. What? Call 911, Lynn? Hang up and call 911 right now. KRRRT, KRRRT, KRRRT. The sound was methodical, unhurried. It was the sound of someone with all the time in the world. The sound of someone enjoying this. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor. Call 911. My brain screamed the command, but my body wouldn't obey. All I could do was listen to that sound, that tiny, awful sound that separated my world from his. Then, it stopped. The sudden silence was a physical blow. It pressed in on my eardrums. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, the phone still pressed to my ear. Kevin was yelling my name, his voice frantic, but I couldn't process the words. I was holding my breath, waiting. My legs, moving on their own volition, carried me forward. One slow, silent step at a time, back towards the door. What was I doing? I should be hiding. I should be screaming. But I had to know. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door, my body trembling. I could feel the vibrations of the building, the distant thrum of the heat kicking on. Nothing else. Just silence. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had given up. A voice whispered from the other side. It was so close it felt like it was whispering directly into my ear canal. A dry, flat male voice, utterly devoid of any emotion. "Open up, Lynn." A pause. My heart stopped. "I just want to see you." It wasn't a request. It was a promise. The words were not Kevin's. They were not anyone's I knew. They were the auditory equivalent of a scalpel blade, cold, thin, and sharp. A strangled gasp escaped my throat. I clapped both hands over my mouth, stumbling backward, away from the door, my heel catching on the carpet. I fell hard, my head smacking against the floor. I didn't feel the pain. All I could feel was the echo of that voice. All I could see was the solid wood of the door that separated me from it. I scrambled backward on my hands and feet like a crab, pushing myself away, my eyes wide, locked on the door. My mind was a blank slate of pure animal terror. It was no longer a game. It was no longer a prank. It was here. And then I saw it. From the thin crack of space between the bottom of the door and the floor, a small, white rectangle was slowly, silently pushing its way into my room, an inch at a time. It slid across the worn carpet, coming to a rest about a foot from the door. A thin piece of paper. I stared at it. My breath came in ragged, shallow pants. The voice was gone. The scratching was gone. There was only that small white square on my floor. An offering. My shaking hand reached out. My fingers felt numb, disconnected from my body. They brushed against the smooth, glossy surface. It was a Polaroid. I picked it up. My fingers fumbled with it, turning it over. The image slowly swam into focus. It was a photograph of me. I was in my bed, asleep on my side, my face peaceful. The angle was from above, looking down. From the far corner of the room, the corner where the blanket was now draped, the corner where the mirror stood. My fingers were numb. The Polaroid was slick with my sweat. Brain static. A high-pitched whine that drowned out Kevin's frantic voice on the phone still pressed against my ear. My eyes couldn't break away from the image. Me. Asleep. The photo was taken from above, from the corner of the room. A distorted fisheye effect warped the edges of my bed. My desk. My entire world. It was the angle from the mirror. The tall, antique mirror that was now, mercifully, hidden under a thick, gray blanket. A pointless gesture. A child's defense. The monster wasn't in the mirror. It had been looking through it. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the hardwood floor. Kevin's tiny, tinny voice yelled my name one last time before the line went dead. The silence that followed was a physical thing. It had weight. It pressed down on me. I scrambled backward, my back hitting the leg of my desk. Hard. The pain was a distant signal from a body that wasn't mine anymore. My gaze was locked on the door, on the thin slice of hallway visible underneath, the space where the photo had appeared. Then, a new sound. A key turning in the lock. A jolt shot through me, pure animal electricity. No, not like this. It had a key. It was coming in. I looked wildly around the room for a weapon. A textbook? A lamp? My throat closed up. My breath came in ragged, silent gasps. I was going to die right here on this cheap, scuffed floor. The door swung inward. My roommate, Casey, stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the vomit-yellow light of the hall. She was loaded down with a duffel bag and a backpack, her hair a mess from a long bus ride. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the dim light of my desk lamp. "Jesus, Lynn," she said, dropping her bags with a heavy thud. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Why is it so dark in here?" Relief hit me so hard it felt like a punch to the gut. I almost collapsed. It was just Casey, my loud, perpetually messy, blessedly normal roommate. She was back. She was real. I wasn't alone. Tears I didn't know I was holding back streamed down my face. I couldn't form words. I just pointed a trembling finger at the Polaroid lying on the floor. "What the hell?" She kicked the door shut behind her, the heavy lock clicking into place. It was a sound that had terrified me minutes ago. Now it was a shield. She picked up the photo, her brow furrowed. "The hell is this? Is this you? Who took this?" My voice came out as a raw croak. "It came under the door." I told her everything. The words tumbled out of me in a frantic, disjointed mess. The knocking, the pad see ew with the mushrooms I hated, Kevin's nickname on the note, the scratching, the whisper through the wood, and then the photo. Proof. The final, undeniable proof that I wasn't losing my mind. Casey listened, her expression shifting from tired annoyance to genuine concern. She sat on the edge of her own bed, the Polaroid held delicately between her fingers. She put a hand on my knee. Her skin was warm. Real. "Okay, holy shit," she breathed. That's not a prank, Lynn. That's some next-level psycho-stalker crap." She looked around the room, at the blanket over the mirror. "You need to report this. Like, right now. Campus police, the RA, everyone." "I tried," I whispered. "Kevin, he thought I was just stressed, that I was imagining it." "Well, you're not imagining this," she said, tapping the photo. She was on my side. She believed me. The tightness in my chest eased, just a fraction. "Some creep in the dorms, probably. Got a master key or something. We'll go together first thing in the morning. We'll demand they check the security footage." She looked exhausted but determined. "For now I'm here. The door is locked. He's not getting in." Her words were a balm. I let out a breath I'd been holding since I saw the takeout box. Maybe she was right. Some sicko from another floor. Now that Casey was here, the room felt less like a cage and more like a fortress. A two-person fortress. Casey started unpacking. A familiar ritual of chaos. Clothes flew out of her duffel bag onto her unmade bed. Textbooks clattered onto her desk. She yawned, stretching her arms above her head. As she reached for her bag of toiletries, a set of keys fell from her jacket pocket, landing on her desk with a metallic jangle. My eyes snagged on them. House key, dorm key, mailbox key, and something else. A keychain. A small, stylized metal charm. An eye. An open eye, with a sharp, geometric iris. My blood turned to ice water. My mouth went dry. I had seen that eye before. 2 days ago, in an email from an anonymous address, sent to my university account. No subject line. The body of the email contained only a single, low-resolution image. That exact eye. Beneath it, one line of text. "I see you." I had deleted it immediately, writing it off as spam, a phishing attempt. A weird glitch. It wasn't a glitch. "Casey," I said. My voice was flat. "Yeah?" She was rummaging through her bag, her back to me. "Your keys, the keychain." She turned, glancing at her desk. "Oh, that thing?" She picked them up, dangling the charm. The metal caught the lamplight. It seemed to wink at me. "Cool, right? Found it on Etsy. Some shop that sells weird occult stuff? I thought it looked kinda creepy cool." Her explanation was so easy. So plausible. An online shop? A random purchase? Of course! It had to be. A coincidence. A horrifying, gut-wrenching coincidence. But my sanity was hanging by a thread, and that thread was being sawed through, fiber by fiber. My gaze darted from the eye in her hand to the blanket covering the mirror. "I see you." A piece of a puzzle clicked into place, forming a picture I didn't want to look at. My paranoia, once a faint hum, was now a screaming siren. "Right," I said, forcing a smile that felt like cracking plaster. "Yeah, cool." She tossed the keys back on her desk and disappeared into the hall to brush her teeth. I was alone with the eye. It lay there on her desk, watching me. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't random. None of it was. The enemy wasn't just outside anymore. The enemy was unpacking her suitcase. Later, the lights were out. The room was divided by shadow and the pale moonlight filtering through the window. Casey was in her bed. I was in mine. Sleep was a million miles away. My body was rigid, every muscle tensed. I strained my ears in the darkness, listening to the hum of the mini-fridge, the distant wail of a siren a few miles away, the sound of Casey breathing. In, out, in, out. A steady rhythm. She was asleep. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Get a grip, Lynn. She's your friend. You're just terrified. You're connecting dots that aren't there." Then, the breathing pattern changed. It stopped for a second, a rustle of blankets. A faint blue glow illuminated the space around Casey's bed. Her phone. I held my breath. A whisper cut through the dark. So faint, I almost thought I'd imagined it. I turned my head on my pillow, ever so slowly. I was faking sleep. My eyes were just tiny slits. I could see her silhouette, propped up on one elbow, the phone held close to her face. "No, I know," she whispered. Her voice was different. Low, urgent. "It's starting to suspect." A pause. She was listening to someone on the other end. My heart didn't just beat, it slammed against my ribs. A frantic, trapped thing. "It." She called me it. "Yeah," Casey whispered again. "I know." I saw the look on its face. "I have to be more careful." The world dissolved. The room, the bed, the air, it all fell away. There was only her voice, those words, a confirmation of my deepest, most unspeakable fear. She was part of it. She was talking to the man who whispered through my door, the man who took the photo. They were working together. The takeout box wasn't a mistake. It was a test to see my reaction, and Casey was here to report back. This whole time, every comforting word, every look of concern had been a lie. A performance. The trap wasn't the room. She was the trap. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't lie here for one more second, pretending to be asleep while she plotted with my tormentor 5 feet away. I shot up in bed. I slammed my hand down on the switch of the lamp between our beds. Harsh, yellow light flooded the room. Casey gasped, yanking the phone away from her ear. She shielded her eyes. "Lynn, what the fuck? I was on the phone." "Who are you?" The question ripped from my throat, raw and accusatory. "Who the hell are you talking to? Why are you doing this to me?" Her face was a mask of pure confusion and alarm. "What are you talking about? I was talking to my mom. You scared the shit out of me." "Liar!" I screamed, stumbling out of bed. I felt unhinged. I probably looked it. "I heard you. You said it's starting to suspect. You were talking about me." "My mom, Lynn. I was talking about my dad." Casey's voice rose, matching my hysteria. She was scrambling to sit up, holding her phone up like a shield. "He thinks she's been spending too much money. He's starting to suspect she bought a new purse. Jesus Christ, you've lost your mind." She shoved the phone at me. I flinched back, but my eyes shot to the screen. The call was still connected. The contact name at the top read, Mom. For a split second, the world tilted back on its axis. Her story was plausible, insanely plausible. The late-night call. The hushed tones. The paranoia about a parent. It fit. And I, with my wild eyes and ragged breathing, was the one who looked crazy. I was the one screaming at my terrified roommate in the middle of the night. The doubt was a physical blow. Was she telling the truth? Was I so far gone that I was twisting everything into a weapon against me? "You're scaring me, Lynn," she said, her voice softer now but shaking. Seriously. I just stared at her, my mind a war zone of conflicting certainties. "You don't believe me," she said, her expression hardening with a hurt, angry resolve. "Fine. You want proof? Here's proof." She stabbed at the screen, ending the call. Then, before I could say a word, she hit redial and pressed the speakerphone button. The sound of the dialing tone was obscenely loud in the quiet room. It rang once. Twice. Then, a click. A woman's voice, warm and groggy with sleep, filled the small space between us. Casey? Honey, is everything okay? It's so late. It was her mom. It was real. A wave of shame and exhaustion washed over me. I felt like an idiot. A complete, paranoid fool. I opened my mouth to apologize, to say anything. But before I could, another voice spoke from the phone speaker. It came from the same source, but it was not the same voice. It was a sound layered over her mother's, a sickness on the line. A dry, rasping distortion, like a recording played through a broken speaker. It was the whisper from the door, but amplified, digitized, colder. The girl is right there, isn't she? The phone hit the floor, cracking the screen. The sound, a thin, sharp snap, was lost in the noise. Casey's screaming. My screaming. Her mother's confused voice, a tiny ghost still chirping from the shattered speaker. Casey? What's happening? Casey didn't answer. She was scrambling away from me, her back hitting her own desk, eyes wide with a terror that looked so real, so genuine, it almost broke through my own. She looked at me like I was the monster. Lynn, what was that? She whimpered, pointing a shaky finger at my phone on the ground. You know what that was, I snarled. My voice was ugly, torn from my throat. That was your friend. I don't know what you're talking about. The resident advisor, a tired-looking junior named Marco, showed up 10 minutes later, summoned by the screaming. He stood in the doorway, taking in the scene. Me, standing wild-eyed in the middle of the room. Casey huddled by her desk, crying. My phone, a dead thing on the floor. Her phone, still clutched in her hand. What's going on here? Marco asked, his voice drenched in weary authority. Words spilled out, a torrent of accusations and denials. I told him about the whisper on the phone. Casey sobbed that she had no idea what it was, that her line must have been crossed, that I'd been acting crazy for days. She showed him her call log. Mom, it was all perfectly plausible. I sounded unhinged. I knew how I sounded. They let her go. Campus police gave her a temporary room for the night. For her safety. I watched her pack a bag, her hands shaking. She wouldn't look at me. Not once. As she left, flanked by Marco, she finally turned her head, just for a second. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't scared. It was something else. A cold, hard look. The look you give a problem that's about to be solved. Then she was gone. The door clicked shut. I was alone. The silence that fell wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the sound of a vacuum, of a space where a person used to be. My chest ached. I sank onto my bed, the mattress groaning under my weight. The other side of the room was a monument to her rapid departure. A stray sock. Her textbooks. The keychain with the eye on her desk. I couldn't look at it. My brain tried to work. Tried to make sense of it. A crossed line. A technical glitch. A prank caller who got insanely, horribly lucky with their timing. An auditory hallucination brought on by extreme stress. Yes, that's what it was. It had to be. I was just stressed. I was connecting dots that weren't there. I repeated it to myself, a mantra against the dark. It's in your head. It's just in your head. I was just a girl in a dorm room who had a fight with her roommate. That's all. Tomorrow I would apologize. We would sort it out. Life would go back to normal. I lay there for an hour, maybe two, just staring at the ceiling, forcing my breathing to stay even, trying to will the world back onto its axis. The TV clicked on. I sat bolt upright. My heart hammered against my ribs. The small television on my desk, a cheap model I'd brought from home, flared to life. Not to a channel, to a screen of pure, hissing static. Black and white chaos. The sound was a harsh shh, filling the room, scraping at the inside of my ears. I didn't move. I just stared. A power surge? Faulty wiring? My mind scrambled for a reason, any reason. The static churned. It wasn't random. Patterns began to form in the noise, like faces in clouds. Then it resolved. The chaos coalesced. Pixels burned into place, forming a single character in the center of the screen. A number. 5. It hung there for a long moment, An accusation. Then it vanished, swallowed by the static, before a new number burned its way through. 4. My breath hitched. No, this wasn't faulty wiring. This wasn't a glitch. This was a message. 3. I scrambled off the bed, my feet hitting the cold floor. My eyes darted to the door. Locked. I checked it 3 times after Casey left. It was a deadbolt. Solid. Safe. 2. The letters appeared below the number. A childish scrawl made of harsh, digital lines. Ready or not. The static roared, louder now. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't clench them into fists. This was a game I didn't want to play. 1. Here I come. The final number flashed, and then the screen went black. The hissing sound cut out. The silence that followed was worse. It was a held breath, a waiting silence. Then every light in the room went out, plunged into absolute darkness. The only light was a faint, hazy glow from the streetlights outside, barely outlining the window. My heart was a drum solo in my chest. I couldn't see anything. I couldn't see the door. I couldn't see my desk. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. My whole world was gone. Click. The sound came from the door. It was small. A precise, metallic sound. The sound of a lock tumbler turning. My blood ran cold. It was impossible. It was a deadbolt. It only locked from the inside. There was no keyhole on the outside. It could not be opened from the hall. It was impossible. Creak. The door swung inward. Slowly. A perfect dark rectangle opened into the greater darkness of the hallway. No light spilled in. The hallway lights were out too. Did it cut the power to the whole floor? A shadow detached itself from the doorway. It was a silhouette. A man. Tall. He stepped into the room. 1 step, then another. The footsteps were slow. Deliberate. Heavy. The sound of work, boots on the cheap floorboards. He wasn't rushing. He was taking his time. He was enjoying this. My mind went blank. All rational thought vanished, replaced by a single primal command. Hide. My body moved before my brain did. I dropped to my hands and knees, the floor rough against my skin. I scrambled, crab-like, toward my bed. I didn't think, I just moved. I squeezed myself into the 2K dusty space underneath. My cheek pressed against the floor. It smelled like dust and old fabric. I pulled my legs in, curling into a tight ball, trying to make myself smaller, trying to disappear. I held my breath, the air burning in my lungs. The footsteps stopped. He was in the middle of the room. I could see his boots from my vantage point. Black, scuffed leather, unmoving. Waiting. My heart was going to explode. It was too loud. He could hear it. He had to hear it. Minutes passed. Or maybe seconds. Time had no meaning. There was only the darkness, the dust, and the sound of my own blood roaring in my ears. Then the footsteps started again. Slow. Methodical. Thud. 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 He was walking a perimeter, exploring his new territory. My room. My space. He walked past the foot of my bed. I could see the dark shape of his legs moving through the faint moonlight. He walked over to my desk. A soft rustling sound. Was he touching my things? My books? My laptop? The footsteps came closer. Thud. He was right next to the bed. I could have reached out and touched his boot. I squeezed my eyes shut. Don't see me. Please don't see me. Silence. A terrible, knowing silence. He knew I was here. This was part of the game. The cat pausing before it pounces on the mouse. A single drop of sweat trickled down my temple. It traced a cold path over my cheekbone, my jaw. It hung there for an eternity, on the edge of my chin. I couldn't wipe it. I couldn't move. To move was to die. The drop fell. It hit the hardwood floor with a tiny tick sound, a sound as loud as a gunshot in the silent room. The footsteps didn't move. Instead, I heard a new sound, a rustle of fabric, a groan of protesting knees. He was getting down. He was going to look under the bed. I flattened myself against the floor, trying to press myself into the wood. into nothingness. My eyes were wide open, staring into the darkness at the edge of the bedspread. The bedspread lifted. A face appeared in the sliver of space. It was illuminated by the hazy, sick light from the window. The light caught on pale skin. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. Where the eyes should have been, there was only smooth, uninterrupted skin, like a doll before the features are painted on. No nose, either, just a flat plane of flesh. But there was a mouth. Oh God, the mouth. It was a lipless slit that was pulled back into a huge, impossible smile, a black crescent moon that stretched from ear to ear. A hole in the world. It stared right at me, its eyeless face somehow locking onto mine. The smile widened, and from that black gash of a mouth, a familiar sound slithered into the air. It wasn't loud. It was a whisper. The same dry, rasping whisper from the door. From the phone. Found you. My mind shattered. A scream tore itself from my lungs, raw and wordless. I kicked out, my legs flailing, my heel connecting with something solid. I didn't care. I shoved myself backward, scraping my back against the underside of the bed frame, scrambling, clawing my way out from the other side. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. I just needed to get out. I burst out from under the bed, and the world exploded into light. The lamp on my desk was on. The overhead light was on. The room was bright, yellow, and completely, utterly empty. There was no man, no boots, no face, nothing. I was on my hands and knees, hyperventilating. My body shook uncontrollably. I was soaked in sweat. My gaze shot to the door. It was closed. The deadbolt was thrown. It was locked, just as I had left it. I stumbled over to it, my legs like jelly. I touched it. Solid. Unopened. Was it a dream? A hallucination? A night terror so vivid it felt real? My mind reeled. I looked around the room, a frantic, desperate search for proof. For anything. The TV was off. My desk was undisturbed. Casey's side of the room was still. Silent. I was losing my mind. That was the only explanation. The stress had finally broken me. It was all in my head. The voice on the phone, the countdown, the face, all of it. A fiction created by a terrified mind. The thought brought not relief, but a different kind of horror. The horror of not being able to trust your own senses. My eyes fell on the mirror. The tall, antique mirror Casey hated. Still covered by the thick gray blanket I'd thrown over it 2 days ago. It was just a shape in the corner of the room, a muffled rectangle. A pointless gesture. A child's defense. My breath caught in my throat. The blanket wasn't flat. In the center of the covered mirror, the gray fabric was stretched taut. It was bulging outward, into the room. A smooth, round shape was pressing against it from the other side. From inside the mirror, as I watched, paralyzed, the bulge grew. It pushed further out. More and more. A convex distortion in the fabric. It looked like a head. It looked like someone was pressing their face against the glass, trying to push their way through. My gaze was stapled to the corner of the room, the gray blanket. The bulge. It was a smooth, obscene curve pushing the fabric outward. My heart, which had just begun to slow, went into a dead sprint. The shape was firm. Unmoving. A perfect, rounded violation of space. It was the size of a head. It was the shape of a head. Pressing from the other side. From inside the glass. Breathe. I forgot how to breathe. The air in the room was thick, used up. My lungs burned. A single, panicked thought broke through the noise in my skull. Get out! I didn't wait for it to move again. I didn't wait for an explanation. I lurched to my feet, my legs shaking so violently I almost collapsed. I didn't look back. I wrenched the deadbolt open, the same deadbolt that had been useless moments before, and threw the door wide. I spilled out into the hallway. The hall lights were on, bright, sterile, and buzzing. The corridor was empty, a long, clean tunnel of normalcy. I slammed my door shut behind me, the sound echoing like a gunshot. I leaned against it, my whole body trembling, pressing my weight against the wood as if I could hold back whatever was on the other side. My mind was a car crash. The faceless man, The countdown. The mirror. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It was real. It was all real. My feet moved on their own, carrying me down the hall. I half ran, half stumbled, my bare feet slapping against the cold linoleum. I didn't stop until I was pounding on Marco's door. The R.A., the tired junior who already thought I was unhinged. I didn't care. He opened the door a moment later, rubbing his eyes. A textbook was open on his desk behind him. He blinked at me, his face a mask of weary confusion. "Lynn? It's 3 a.m. "Someone was in my room," I said. The words came out in a rush, a ragged gasp. "He got in. The door was locked, the deadbolt was on, but he got in." Marco's face fell. Not with alarm, but with a deep, profound exhaustion. This was the face of a guy who just wanted to pass his midterm, not deal with a hysterical freshman. Okay, slow down," he said, his voice flat. "Was anything taken? Are you hurt?" "No, you don't understand. He was just there, in the dark. And the mirror." I stopped. How could I explain the mirror? How could I say a head was pushing its way through the glass? I could hear the insanity in the words before I even spoke them. "Listen," he said, pinching the bridge of his nose. "We just went through this. You had a fight with your roommate. You're stressed out." "The lock," I insisted, grabbing his arm. His muscles tensed under my fingers. He opened the lock. The deadbolt. From the outside. "You have to get someone to look at the lock." He sighed. A long, drawn-out sound of defeat. "Okay, Lynn. Okay. I'll put in a request with facilities. They can send someone from maintenance to look at it in the morning. Now, please, go to the common room. Try to get some sleep on the couch. We'll sort this out when the sun is up." He didn't believe me. Not a word. To him, I was just a problem to be managed. He closed his door, leaving me alone in the buzzing silence of the hallway. The promise of morning felt like a lifetime away. I didn't sleep. I sat on a hard, lumpy couch in the common area, wrapped in a throw blanket that smelled like stale pizza and air freshener. I watched the black windows slowly turn to gray, then a bruised purple, then a pale, watery blue. Every creak of the building, every hum of the vending machine, sent a jolt of ice through my veins. The image of the bulging blanket was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Around 9 o'clock, a man showed up. He was older, maybe in his 60s, with a thick gray mustache and a tool belt that had seen decades of use. He wore a faded blue jumpsuit with Sal embroidered over the pocket. He looked tired but competent. Marco stood behind him, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "This is the room?" Sal grunted, not looking at me. He just stared at my door. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Sal knelt down in front of the lock. He didn't use a key. He pulled a thin metal tool, a tension wrench, from his belt. He slid it into the keyhole. Then he produced another tool, a delicate-looking pick, and inserted it above the first. He closed his eyes for a second, a doctor listening for a heartbeat. He worked with a quiet, focused intensity. I watched his hands, mesmerized. He tilted his head, his brow furrowed in concentration. He jiggled the pick, gently, making tiny, near-silent adjustments. A small click echoed in the hallway. He pulled the tools out and looked at the doorknob. He turned it. The latch retracted. He had just opened my locked door without a key. He looked up, not at me, but at Marco. Then his gaze finally settled on my face. There was no pity in it, no condescension, just a flat statement of fact. "Yeah, kid," he said, his voice a low rumble. "This thing's been picked. And not by an amateur either. It's a clean job. No scratches, no force. Whoever did it knew what they were doing." The air rushed out of my lungs. A wave of dizziness washed over me. It was a terrifying, sickening kind of relief. A validation that was also a death sentence. "I'm not crazy." The whisper echoed in my mind. The man in my room was real. Sal stood up, his knees cracking. "Standard procedure. Have to replace the whole mechanism." He started unscrewing the housing from the door, the whir of his power drill the most comforting sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a solution, the sound of safety being rebuilt. Marco mumbled something about paperwork and vanished, leaving me alone with Sal. For a few minutes, there was only the methodical sound of work. The drill. the clang of old metal parts dropping onto a tarp, the rustle of plastic packaging as Sal unwrapped a new, shiny lock set. I felt the knot in my stomach begin to loosen, just a fraction. This was real. This was a man fixing a real, physical problem. Then his phone buzzed in his breast pocket. He grunted in annoyance, wiping a greasy hand on his thigh before answering. "Yeah, Sal speaking." He listened. I watched his face, his brow furrowed. "Who? I'm in the middle of a job here." "Right, her father?" His eyes flicked to me, a flash of confusion. I felt a prickle of unease. "Uh-huh, okay. Yeah, I hear you." He listened for another 30 seconds, his expression hardening. The look of professional concern I'd seen earlier was gone, replaced by a stony annoyance. "Right, I get it. Don't worry about it." "Yeah. Consider it handled." He hung up, not shoving the phone back into his pocket, but holding it in his hand like a piece of evidence. He turned his body to face me fully. The drill lay forgotten on the floor. "That was a strange call," he said, his voice stripped of all warmth. "Who was it?" I asked, my own voice a reedy whisper. "A guy. Said he was your father." The floor tilted beneath my feet. "What?" "Said he got a security alert on his phone linked to the campus system." Sal continued, his eyes narrowed, searching my face for the lie. "Said you've been having some episodes. Paranoia. Making things up. Told me you were probably the one who messed with the lock to get attention. He apologized and told me not to waste any more of the school's time or money on you." The air in the hallway became thin and cold. I couldn't draw a full breath. Every word he spoke was a nail, hammering me into a box. I saw the logic clicking into place behind his eyes. The dots connecting. The troubled girl. The cry for attention. The frantic roommate. The over-the-top story. It all made a sick kind of sense. "My father," I said, the words feeling alien in my mouth. "My father died 7 years ago." Sal's face didn't soften. It got harder. He looked at me with open disgust. To him, this wasn't just a lie. It was a sick, pathetic one. An escalation of the game. "That's it," he snapped, kicking a loose screw with the toe of his boot. "I'm done." He began throwing his tools back into his box with loud, angry clatters. The new lock, still in its plastic shell, was tossed in with them. "Wait, what are you doing?" I cried, panic clawing up my throat. "You have to change the lock! Someone got in!" "You solve your own damn problems," he spat, not looking at me. He slammed the lid of his toolbox shut. The sound was final. A judgment. He stood up, hefted the box, and turned his back on me. "Please," I begged. "He'll come back. You can't just leave it like this." He didn't even slow down. He just walked away, his heavy boots thudding down the hall, leaving me standing alone in front of my own violated door. The faceplate was gone. The inner mechanism was exposed. It was worse than before. It was a gaping wound. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the hole where my lock used to be. The hallway felt 100 miles long. My room wasn't my room anymore. It was a box with a broken lid. A stage. It was out there, somewhere. The man with no face. The whisperer. The caller who knew my dead father's name. He had turned my only ally against me with a single phone call. He had cut me off from everything. A cold, hard fury rose up through the fear. It was a bitter, metallic taste in the back of my throat. I was so tired of being scared. I was so tired of being the mouse. I turned and walked back into the room. My room. My eyes went straight to the corner, the tall, antique mirror still wearing its gray blanket like a shroud. A monument to my own fear. Fuck this. I strode across the room, fueled by a reckless rage. I was not a problem to be solved. I was not crazy. I was not a game to be played. With a raw cry that was half scream, half sob, I grabbed the bottom of the blanket with both hands and wrenched it off the mirror. The heavy fabric fell to the floor in a heap, and I saw myself. My reflection stared back at me. Pale face, wild eyes, hair tangled and messy, a mirror image, identical in every detail of fear and exhaustion. Except for one. On the cheek of the girl in the glass, there was a scratch. A thin, angry red line about 3 inches long, running from just below her eye down toward her jaw. As I watched, paralyzed, a single, perfect bead of dark red blood welled up from the center of the wound. It trembled for a second, then broke free, tracing a slow, wet path down her reflected skin. My hand flew to my own face. My fingers trembled as they pressed against my cheek. The skin was smooth, cool, unbroken, perfectly, horribly, intact. The floor felt hard and cold against my back. My hand, still holding the phone, had dropped beside my head. My cheek was still smooth. Uncut. The girl in the mirror was gone, yanked away the moment I'd looked away from the glass. But the image of her was seared into my brain, the red line, the single drop of blood. It was impossible, a trick of the light, a stress-induced hallucination. My mind offered up a dozen rational, flimsy explanations. I batted them all away. They were useless. Lies. A new thought, ugly and sharp, cut through the noise. A thought that made more sense than a bleeding reflection. It was a grounded thought. A human thought. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon. It was a person. Someone who hated me. Someone who knew how to push my buttons. Someone who could pick a lock. Someone who would enjoy watching me unravel. There was only one person. Kevin. It was insane. It was horrible. But it felt more real than a head pressing through a mirror. The fight we'd had last week. A stupid, nasty argument about some girl at a party he'd talked to for too long. My jealousy. His anger. We hadn't talked since. Maybe this was his idea of a lesson. A sick, elaborate prank to punish me for not trusting him. To show me what real paranoia felt like. A fresh wave of fury, cold and clear, washed over the fear. It gave me strength. I scrambled up, grabbing the phone from the floor. My fingers stabbed at his contact name, my thumb hitting the call button with enough force to crack the screen. It rang once, twice. Lynn? His voice was groggy, laced with sleep. You did this. I didn't say it. I spat it. The words were venom. You sick bastard. You did this. A pause. The sound of him sitting up, a rustle of sheets. What? What are you talking about? It's almost 4 a.m. Don't play dumb with me, I was pacing now, a caged animal in my own room. The hole where the lock used to be was a gaping mouth, mocking me. You sent someone, didn't you? You paid some guy to break into my room, to scare me, to teach me a lesson. Sent someone? Lynn, you're not making any sense. I'm 200 miles away. I'm on the camping trip with the guys, remember? Liar! I shrieked. It was the only explanation. It had to be. He picked the lock! He called the maintenance guy and pretended to be my dad! How would he know about my dad? Unless you told him! Another silence, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. The sleepiness was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp edge of alarm. Lynn! Seriously, what are you talking about? Your dad? Stop it! Just stop it! Ping. A notification appeared on my phone screen. A picture message from Kevin. Ping. 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 A series of them. I pulled the phone away from my ear, my thumb shaking as I opened the first one. It was a selfie. Kevin's face, lit by the flickering orange light of a fire. He was grinning his stupid happy grin, a beer in one hand. Tents were visible in the background. In the bottom corner, a small, white timestamp, 10:15 p.m. I swiped to the next one, a group shot. Kevin with his arm around his friend Dave. They were by a lake. The timestamp, 1:30 a.m. The next one, Kevin, wrapped in a sleeping bag inside his tent, face scrunched up in a fake pout. Timestamp, 3:08 a.m. Less than an hour ago. The last one was a video. I pressed play. It was short. Maybe 10 seconds. The camera panned across a dark tent, showing 2 other guys fast asleep. It settled on Kevin's face, whispering to the camera. See? Middle of nowhere. Just us and the mosquitoes. Now will you please tell me what the hell is going on? The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the hardwood floor. The alibi was perfect. Airtight. He wasn't here. He couldn't be. My one solid, rational theory dissolved into smoke, leaving me with nothing but the impossible truth. Lynn? His voice, tinny and distant, came from the phone on the floor. Lynn, are you there? You're starting to scare me." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I just stared at the hole in my door. I was alone. Utterly, completely alone. And then I heard it. A soft click. It came from the corner of the room. I turned my head slowly. My laptop, which was closed and unplugged on my desk, had just popped open. The lid lifted itself a few inches, then stopped. My breath hitched. I didn't move. I just watched. The screen flickered to life. The fan inside started to whir, a low hum that filled the sudden silence. I hadn't turned it on. I hadn't touched it. The power cord was still coiled neatly beside it. My video chat program launched itself. The icon bounced on the screen before the window opened, maximized, filling the entire display. It was trying to initiate a call from a blank user icon. No name, no picture, just a black silhouette against a gray background. Accept. Decline. Before I could even think, the call connected on its own. The screen stayed black on the other end. There was no video feed, just a void. Then a voice came through the speakers. A voice I knew better than my own. "Come on, baby! Don't pretend!" It was Kevin's voice. The exact pitch. The exact timbre. But the tone was all wrong. It was smooth. Predatory. Coated in a layer of saccharine malice. It was a performance. A mockery of him. "You know it's me," the voice purred. It scraped against my nerves. "No need to be scared. I just miss you." I lunged forward, my hand shaking uncontrollably. I slammed the laptop shut. The plastic cover made a loud, satisfying thwack. Silence. For a second. And then, his voice came again. Not from the laptop. It came from everywhere. "That's not very nice, Lynn." It wasn't coming from a speaker. It was just in the air. A low, conversational murmur that seemed to emanate from the very walls of the room. It was Kevin's voice, but disembodied, omnipresent. Slamming the door on me? Just like that time at the little Italian place, remember? The one with the bad breadsticks? You got so mad about the salt shaker. My blood ran cold. That was a real memory. A stupid, private detail that nobody else could possibly know. I backed away from the desk, stumbling over my own feet. My back hit the wall. I slid down to the floor, my eyes darting around the empty room. The voice chuckled. A warm, familiar sound that was now the most terrifying thing I had ever heard. It sounded like it was coming from right beside my ear. "I'm just worried about you," it whispered. "You seem stressed. We should go away for a weekend. Just us. Like we talked about. Remember that cabin by the lake you liked?" I clapped my hands over my ears, pressing my palms hard against my skull until it hurt. I could still hear him. The voice seeped through my fingers, vibrating directly into my brain. It was inside my head. "You can't shut me out, Lynn. I hear everything." The voice shifted, coming from the corner by the closet now. "I know you cried last week after we fought. I know you told your mom you were fine, but you weren't." "Shut up," I whimpered, the words barely a breath. "Shut up, shut up, shut up." "I know the story you told me about your dad," the voice said, its tone now sharp, cruel, twisting the knife. "The one you've never told anyone else. The one about the hospital. About the last thing he said to you." A scream tore itself from my throat. A raw, ragged sob of pure animal terror. I couldn't fight this. I couldn't run from it. It was in my memories. It was in my walls. It was in my room. It was me. I screamed and screamed, a pointless, howling rage against the sound that was everywhere and nowhere at once. And then, silence. The voice was gone. The only sound was the harsh, ragged rasp of my own breathing. I was slumped on the floor, my throat raw, my body trembling with exhaustion. It felt like I had been screaming for hours. Slowly, shakily, I lifted my head. My gaze was drawn, as if by a magnet, back to the one place I didn't want to look. The mirror. I looked up. My reflection was standing there. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, her hair a wreck. She was a perfect copy of the broken girl on the floor, but she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed on a point somewhere behind me, over my shoulder. Her gaze was directed at the door, and on her face, a slow, knowing, utterly satisfied smile began to spread. The girl in the glass wore my face, but she wasn't me. She was smiling, a wide, slow, knowing smile that didn't touch her eyes. Her eyes, My eyes were fixed on a point just over my shoulder, staring at the closed bedroom door. The smile was for whatever was standing there, in the room with me. My scream died in my throat, choked off by a paralyzing cold that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My brain had snapped. That was the only answer that made any sense. The stress. The isolation. Kevin. The voice in the walls. Something inside my head finally just broke, shattering into a million pieces. A new thought, a lifeline, surfaced through the panic. The gas leak. The maintenance guy who reeked of cheap cigarettes. Maybe he didn't fix it right. Maybe the landlord lied. Or the mold. People talked about that toxic black mold in old buildings. It makes you see things, hear things. It makes you lose your mind before it kills you. That had to be it. I wasn't being haunted. I was being poisoned. That single, desperate scientific explanation was enough. It was a flimsy shield, but it was a shield. It was something to hold on to. I pushed myself backward, scraping my hands on the hardwood floor, my eyes never leaving the smiling face in the mirror. I had to prove it was a hallucination. I had to take control back from my own broken mind. I scrambled to my feet, my legs unsteady, and staggered into the small attached bathroom. I yanked open the cabinet under the sink, my hands fumbling, knocking over a bottle of drain cleaner. I found what I was looking for. Windex. A roll of paper towels. Real, solid objects. I walked back into the bedroom, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The girl in the mirror was still there. Still smiling. Still looking over my shoulder. "You're not real," I whispered. The words came out as a dry croak. "You're just bad air." I sprayed the Windex directly at her face. The blue liquid ran in streaks down the glass, blurring the horrible smile. I tore off a sheet of paper towel and began to wipe. I scrubbed hard, my knuckles white, the friction making a screeching sound. I focused on the act. The physical sensation. The smell of ammonia cutting through the air. Anything to anchor me to reality. When I finished, I stepped back. The glass was clean. Spotless. A perfect, reflective surface. I looked up. My reflection just stared back. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, her hair a mess. She was me. She was normal. The smile was gone. A breath I didn't know I was holding escaped my lungs in a shuddering gasp. It was over. The mold. The gas. Whatever it was, the moment of clarity, the physical action had cleared my head. I felt dizzy with relief. To be sure, I did a small, simple test. I tilted my head to the right. The girl in the mirror tilted her head. To the right. My blood turned to ice. It happened so fast, so fluidly, my brain took a full second to process the absolute impossibility of what I had just seen. A mirror reverses your image. If I tilt right, my reflection tilts left. That is physics. That is a rule, a law of the universe that had been true every single day of my life until this one. This wasn't a reflection. It was a copy, a perfect wrong copy. "No," I breathed. "No, no, no." It sat in front of me, wearing my face, mimicking my terror with a flawless, alien precision. It had fooled me. It had let me clean its face, letting me believe I was in control. My mind raced, trying to find a loophole, a trick of the light, an illusion caused by the angle. But I knew. Deep in my gut, I knew. Another test. A final, stupid test. My hand rose, trembling. I held up my right hand, palm facing the mirror. 5 fingers. Like a puppet on a string, the girl in the glass held up her right hand. 5 fingers. Her movements were my movements. Instantaneous. Perfect. I watched her eyes. My eyes. They were blank, watching me, waiting. Slowly, deliberately, I folded my pinky down. 4 fingers. her pinky folded down. 4 fingers. Still a perfect imitation. Still impossibly wrong. The sight of her right hand mimicking my right hand was more nauseating than any grotesque monster. It was a violation of reality itself. I held my breath, my hand frozen in the 4-finger gesture. I stared at her, and she stared back. For a full 5 seconds we were locked in that position. Human and copy. And then, it happened. Her other hand, the one hanging limp at her side, twitched. I saw it in my peripheral vision, but didn't dare look away from her face. Slowly, with a horrifying, deliberate grace, her ring finger on that other hand lowered. She was still holding up 4 fingers on her right hand, mirroring me, but now she was raising her other hand, showing me 3. My hand was still showing 4. Her reflection, no, the thing, wasn't copying me anymore. It was moving on its own. It was a separate being, a thing with its own thoughts, its own will, and it was trapped in the glass, wearing my skin. The illusion of control shattered. This wasn't poison. This wasn't madness. This was real. I didn't scream. There was no time, no air. There was only one thought, a primal command that bypassed my frozen brain and shot directly into my muscles. Run. I spun around, away from the abomination in the mirror. My bare feet slapped against the cold floor. 2 steps. 3. The door was right there. My escape. My hand shot out, reaching for the doorknob. The moment my fingers touched the metal, a shock of cold, so profound it felt like a burn, jolted up my arm. It wasn't the normal chill of metal. It was a deep, penetrating cold, like a piece of dry ice. I winced, my survival instinct overriding the pain, and curled my fingers around it. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. The doorknob was polished brass, a tiny, warped fish-eye mirror, and in its curved, distorted surface, I could see the room behind me. I could see her. She was no longer standing in the center of the room. She was right behind me. Her face filled the tiny, convex reflection, and the smile was back. But it was pulling now, stretching. The corners of her mouth ripped past her jawline, widening into an impossible, silent scream of joy. Her eyes, my eyes, sank into black pits. Her face began to melt like hot wax, the features dripping and running down a skull that wasn't mine anymore. It was a mask of my face, and it was peeling off to show the void underneath. A choked sob tore from my throat. I yanked the door. The latch clicked, and it flew open. I didn't run into the hallway. I fell into it, spilling onto the worn carpet, slamming my shoulder hard against the opposite wall. The impact sent a fresh shock of pain through my body, but it was nothing compared to the terror. I scrambled away from the doorway on my hands and knees, crab walking backward until my back hit the wall again. I sat there on the floor of the empty, silent hall, gulping air, my chest heaving. The door to my room was wide open. Silence. The disembodied voice was gone. The smiling reflection was gone. There was only the sound of my own ragged breathing echoing in the hallway. Slowly, shakily, I pushed myself up, my whole body trembling. I had to see. I had to be sure. I crept forward, my heart a painful hammer in my chest, and peered around the doorframe into my room. It was empty. Just a room. The desk with the closed laptop. The unmade bed. The tall wardrobe. Everything was exactly as it should be. My eyes snapped to the mirror. It was just a mirror again. It reflected the empty hallway wall behind me. Harmless. A simple, inanimate object. It was over. I had escaped. But there was something on the glass. A smear. A faint smudge near the top right corner. Almost invisible. It must have been from when I was cleaning. But I had been so thorough. I leaned closer, my eyes squinting to get a better look. It was pale and greasy against the clean surface. It had the distinct shape, the unmistakable whorls and lines of a print, a handprint. And as my eyes focused, the sick, final, soul-crushing truth slammed into me. The print wasn't on the outside of the glass. It was on the inside. I didn't sleep. Sleep wasn't an option. I spent the night on a lumpy, stained couch in the building's common room, the door wedged shut with a fire extinguisher. Every creak of the old building, every hum of the vending machine sent a jolt through my system. Dawn didn't bring relief. Only a weak, gray light that made the peeling paint and grimy linoleum look even more depressing. The handprint. On the inside. The thought circled my brain on an endless, grinding loop. I had to leave. Not just the room, but the whole damn building. The city. I needed my wallet, my car keys, my phone. All of it was back in there. With it, my body screamed in protest as I forced myself to stand. Every muscle ached. My eyes felt like they were full of sand. I walked a few steps to my apartment door, my own personal gate to hell. My hand trembled as I reached for the knob. It was just a room, an empty room. I'd seen it. Whatever that thing was, it was trapped in the glass. It couldn't get out. Just get your stuff, I whispered to myself, the sound thin in the quiet hall. Wallet, keys, phone. In and out. 30 seconds. I took a breath, turned the knob, pushed the door open. The first thing that hit me was the sound. A loud, aggressive hiss filled the space. A churning storm of black and white pixels. A churning storm of pure static. I never left the TV on. Never. I hadn't even touched it in weeks. My eyes shot to the power cord. A black snake running from the wall to the back of the set. It was plugged in tight. The hissing was the only sound. A wall of noise that seemed to push against my ears. But there was something else. Underneath it. Woven into the fabric of the static. So faint I thought I was imagining it. A thread of sound. A whisper. Leon. My blood turned to ice. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the knob. Did I hear that? Was it just the random noise of the static forming a familiar sound? Wishful thinking. Desperate denial. Lynn. There it was again. Clearer this time, not loud. Just present. A voice made of radio wave fuzz and dead air. It was coming from the TV speakers. I was sure of it. This was its new game. A tech haunting. It was using the electronics. Fine. I could deal with that. I could solve that. I let go of the door and stalked into the room, my focus narrowed on the television. My steps felt heavy, like I was wading through water. The hissing grew louder. The whisper kept pace. Lean. Shut up, I muttered, my voice tight. My eyes stayed locked on the TV, refusing to look at the wardrobe mirror on the opposite wall. I wasn't giving it the satisfaction. I reached behind the console, my fingers fumbling for the cord. The plastic felt warm. I gripped it tight. Lean. I yanked the plug from the wall socket. The loud hiss cut off instantly. The screen flashed and went black. Silence crashed down on the room, so sudden and complete it was like a physical blow. It was deafening. My own ragged breathing was an intrusion. I stood there for a full 5 seconds, my knuckles white where I gripped the plug. It was over. The sound was gone. But it wasn't. Lien. My heart stopped. The voice was still there. But it had changed. It wasn't coming from the speakers anymore. There was no volume. It wasn't a sound wave hitting my eardrums. It was a frequency. A vibration that hummed directly inside my skull, bypassing my ears entirely. A cold, clean, perfect whisper resonating in the bone. I dropped the plug. It clattered on the hardwood floor. A choked noise escaped my throat. It wasn't the TV. It was never the TV. The TV was just a distraction, a magic trick. My eyes shot around the room, desperate for a source. The window, streaked with dirt, reflected a distorted version of my unmade bed. The whisper seemed to pulse from its surface. "Lynn." I spun around. My phone was on the nightstand, its screen a black, glossy mirror. The whisper felt stronger there, like it was emanating from that small, dark rectangle. "Lynn, closer." I backed away, stumbling over my own feet. No, impossible. My gaze, against every instinct, against every frantic plea from my own sanity, was drawn across the room, to the tall wardrobe, to the full-length mirror mounted on its door. The moment my eyes landed on the glass, the whisper inside my head exploded. "Lynn." It wasn't a sound, it was an impact. A psychic fist slamming into the center of my brain. I cried out, clapping my hands over my ears, a useless, pathetic gesture. The whisper wasn't in the air, it was in me. And the mirror was the amplifier, the antenna, the source of the signal that was broadcasting pure terror into my head. "Look at me, Lynn." I squeezed my eyes shut. "No, get out of my head. I am in your head. I am in the glass. I am in the window. I am in your eyes." The voice, the frequency, was relentless. It was a drill boring into my mind. I couldn't think. I couldn't breathe. There was only the soundless scream of my name over and over, a maddening loop designed to break me. And it was working. My back hit the wall. I slid down to the floor, my hand still pressed against my skull, as if I could physically block it. "You can't shut me out. This is my room now." Something snapped. A raw, primal rage surged up from the depths of my terror. It was hot and clean, burning away the cold panic. I wasn't just a victim. I wasn't just prey. This thing had taken my room, my reflection, my sanity. I wasn't going to let it take my mind without a fight. I scrambled to my feet. My eyes locked on the heavy wooden chair tucked under my desk. Solid, real, a weapon. The voice laughed in my head. A dry, scraping sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. Yes. Try. That was it. The final push. "Shut up!" The words ripped from my throat, raw and loud in the silent room. I grabbed the chair. It was heavier than I expected. I hoisted it up, the wood digging into my palms. My muscles screamed. I didn't care. I held it high, like an axe. My target was the mirror, the source. I would shatter it into 1,000 pieces. I would silence the voice forever. I would kill the girl in the glass. I let out a guttural roar and charged. The room blurred. 2 steps. 3. The smooth, silvered surface of the mirror rushed toward me. I could see her, my reflection. She was charging too, her face a mask of rage, a chair held high above her head. She was a perfect copy. For a split second that stretched into an eternity, we were identical warriors, rushing toward a collision. I swung the chair with every ounce of strength I had. I put my fear, my rage, my entire being into the blow. This was it, the impact, the explosion of glass. But it never came. 1 foot from the mirror, the chair stopped. It just stopped. Dead in the air, as if it had hit a wall of solid steel. A bone-jarring shockwave traveled down the wood, up my arms and slammed into my shoulders. The chair didn't bounce. It just hung there, frozen, defying gravity. My mind couldn't process it. I was still pushing, straining, my muscles locked, but the chair wouldn't move another inch. I looked into the mirror. My reflection's face was no longer angry. She was calm. Her arms were at her sides. She hadn't braced for impact. She was just watching me. As I stared, dumbfounded, her right hand lifted slowly, palm forward, not in a frantic block, but a simple, commanding gesture. A gesture that had stopped a 30-pound chair dead in its tracks. A force I couldn't see, but could feel, was pressing back, a solid, unyielding wall of pure will. Then, with a casual flick of its wrist, my reflection pushed. The invisible force slammed into the chair. It wasn't a gentle shove. It was a violent, explosive repulsion. The chair was ripped from my grasp and flew backward, end over end, as if thrown by a giant. I had no time to react. It hit me square in the chest. The air left my lungs in a painful whoosh. The impact threw me off my feet, and I crashed to the floor, my head cracking hard against the hardwood. Stars exploded behind my eyes. Pain bloomed in my ribs, sharp and hot. I lay there, gasping, trying to pull air back into my body. The whisper in my head was gone. There was only the ringing in my ears and the thudding of my own heart. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself up onto my elbows. My gaze went to the chair. It lay on its side a few feet away, intact, not a scratch on it. Then I looked at the mirror. It was fine, unbroken, glistening. My reflection stood there, looking down at me on the floor. Her expression was blank, nothing. My eyes drifted from her face to the space next to her, the reflected space of my room, to the reflection of the chair I had just thrown. But it wasn't a reflection of the chair beside me. In the mirror, the chair was destroyed. It was a wreck of splintered wood and twisted legs. Shards and fragments of what used to be a piece of furniture lay scattered across the reflected floor. I looked from the real, solid chair on the floor next to me to the shattered wreckage that only existed inside the mirror. The thing in the glass hadn't just stopped me. It had broken my reflection. The pain was an anchor, holding me to the floor, a hot, sharp protest from my ribs with every ragged breath, a dull throb where my head had met the wood. I lay there for a minute, maybe 5, listening to the high-pitched whine in my ears. The whisper in my skull was gone. The silence that replaced it was worse. It was an empty space, waiting to be filled again. Slowly, carefully, I pushed myself onto my elbows, then to my knees. My eyes fixed on the opposite wall, on the chair lying on its side, solid and whole. I looked at the mirror. It shimmered, clean and perfect, reflecting the messy room, reflecting me, a pathetic shape crumpled on the floor. It showed the world exactly as it was, except for the lie I had seen. The lie of the shattered chair. It had shown me what it could do. It had shown me its power. It hadn't just stopped me, it had mocked me. I couldn't stay here. Adrenaline, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the jolt in my chest. Wallet. Keys. Phone. The mantra from before came back. No longer a plan, but a desperate prayer. I kept my back to the wardrobe, to the mirror. I refused to look. I didn't want to see my reflection. I didn't want to know if it was still watching me. My phone was on the nightstand. I snatched it. My wallet lay beside it. I grabbed that too. My keys were on the hook by the door. My hand shook as I took them down. 3 items, all I needed. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I wrenched the door open, stumbled into the hallway, and slammed it shut behind me. The sound echoed in the empty corridor. I stood there, leaning against the door, my chest heaving. Safe. For a second. I couldn't go back. Not ever. But where could I go? The question was a black hole in my mind. Then, an idea. A place with lights. With people. A place where things had to make sense. The public library. It was open late, and it had computers. The library was an island of order. The low hum of the fluorescent lights, the soft rustle of turning pages, the occasional muffled cough. It was aggressively normal, and I clung to it like a life raft. I found an empty computer terminal in a corner, as far away from the large glass windows as I could get. The chair was hard plastic. The keyboard was sticky. I didn't care. It was the mirror. I knew it. This didn't start until the mirror. The voice, the force, the impossible image of the broken chair. It was all tied to that one object. I'd bought it online. A second-hand marketplace site. Maybe the seller knew something. Maybe they'd experienced this too. Maybe they could tell me how to stop it. Hope was a stupid, fragile thing, but it was all I had. I opened the browser. The internet felt slow, sluggish. I typed in the site's address, my fingers fumbling on the unfamiliar keys. I logged in. My hands were still shaking. I clicked on my account, then my purchase history. I scrolled down. There it was. Antique, full-length wardrobe mirror. My heart hammered against my ribs. I could see the seller's username. Antiquarian_finds. A flicker of relief. It was real. I wasn't making it up. I moved the cursor over the username. A hyperlink to their profile page. This was it. An address, a contact number, anything. I clicked. The page loaded. A blue circle spun for a second. Then it stopped. The screen was stark white, with a single line of black text. This user does not exist. What? No. I stared at the words. This user does not exist. It was a standard error message. A glitch. I stabbed the back button. The purchase history page reappeared. The username was still there. I clicked it again. Same result. This user does not exist. A cold dread began to seep into my bones. Okay. Fine. I'd messaged the seller, arranged the pickup. The messages had to be there. I navigated to my inbox. I scrolled back through the weeks, past the message from my landlord about the rent, past junk mail. I got to the date I'd bought the mirror. There was nothing. A blank space. A hole in my digital life where a conversation should have been. It wasn't just the profile. The messages, the listing, every single trace of the transaction had been wiped clean. It was as if I had dreamed the whole thing. As if the mirror had just appeared in my apartment on its own. The library's gentle hum seemed to fade. The walls felt like they were closing in. It knew. The thing in the mirror knew what I was doing. It wasn't just in my apartment. It was here. On the web. It was erasing its own tracks. My mind raced, jumping from one insane possibility to the next. What do you do when the monster you're fighting can edit reality? I abandoned the marketplace site. I opened a new tab. My fingers flew across the keyboard, typing in a frenzy, no longer searching for a person, but for an explanation. Anything. Haunted mirror reflection moves on its own. Reflection doesn't copy me. Mirror shows things that aren't there. The search results were a cascade of junk. Ghost stories for teenagers, paranoid forum posts, articles about optical illusions. I clicked on one, then another. Tales from people who sounded crazy. A woman who claimed her reflection would cry when she was happy. A man who swore he saw a different room in his mirror for a split second. I would have laughed at this a week ago. Now every word sent a fresh spike of fear through me. These weren't just stories. They were warnings. I landed on a forum for paranormal investigators. The page design was from a decade ago. The text was small. I read a post titled, "The Other Side of the Glass." It described an object class known as imprint mirrors. Mirrors that didn't just contain a ghost, but had absorbed a consciousness. They didn't just replay events. They could think. They could learn. They could interact. They could reach out. My blood turned to ice. I am in your head. The memory of the soundless voice was so vivid it made me flinch. The post went on. It said these things were possessive. They latched onto a person. An owner. They became obsessed. They would start by isolating their target, making them doubt their own sanity. Then they would begin to assert control. My eyes were glued to the screen. This was it. This was the answer. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a demon. It was the mirror itself. A conscious, malevolent object. I had to know more. I scrolled down, my gaze fixed on the screen, devouring the text. I didn't notice the library getting quieter. I didn't notice anything but the words that were finally, terrifyingly, making sense of my world. Then, the screen blinked. It went black. A sudden, total void. My own startled face stared back at me from the dark monitor. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, a single line of text appeared. White letters, stark and clean. Right in the center of the screen. It wasn't from the website. It wasn't an error message. It was a statement. Stop looking. A gasp caught in my throat. I shoved my chair back, the plastic feet screeching on the linoleum floor. The sound was horribly loud in the near-silent room. My head snapped up. I looked around wildly. An old man a few tables away looked up from his newspaper, annoyed. A librarian at the main desk gave me a sharp, shush look. Everyone else was buried in their own world. No one was near my computer. No one was watching me. But it had sent me a message. Here. Now. My heart was a drum against my ribs. I felt exposed. Naked. The killer wasn't at home waiting for me. It was with me. My gaze darted around the room, looking for anything out of place. Anything at all. My eyes landed on the large plate glass window on the far wall. It was dark outside, and the window was a perfect black mirror, reflecting the soft yellow light of the library interior. I could see the rows of bookshelves. I could see the other patrons. I could see the back of my own head, my shoulders tense, sitting at the computer terminal. And I could see the figure standing behind me. Time stopped. My breath seized in my lungs. It was a shape, tall and dark, vague. It was standing directly behind my chair, close enough to touch me. It was leaning forward slightly, as if it had been looking over my shoulder at the screen, at the message. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed. My entire survival instinct screamed at me to turn around, to run, to scream. But my body was locked in place. My eyes were fixed on the reflection in that distant window. The figure was perfectly still, a column of shadow attached to my back. Who is that? The question was a silent scream in my head. I couldn't turn. If I turned, it would be real. Here, in the reflection, it was just an image, a nightmare. If I turned, it would be behind me, breathing the same air. I squeezed my eyes shut, hard. A child's trick. If I can't see it, it's not there. I counted to 3. 1, 2, 3. My heart hammered. I took a shaking breath and opened my eyes, forcing them back to the window. The figure was gone. The reflection showed only me, sitting alone at the computer. My shoulders were still tense, but the space behind my chair was empty. A wave of lightheaded relief washed over me. I almost choked on it. It was my mind, the stress, the fear. It was making me see things. It had to be. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. My muscles began to unlock. It was okay. I was okay. I kept my eyes on the window, on the reflection of the back of my head, just to be sure. And then it moved. My reflection. In the glass, the head of my reflection began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, it turned and turned, while my real head remained frozen, facing the computer. It turned until its face was in profile, then fully visible, looking directly out of the window, looking directly at me. And it smiled. It wasn't my smile. It was a slow, predatory curving of the lips, an expression of pure malice and triumph. My own face, my own eyes, twisted into something alien and horrifying. It held my gaze from across the room, a silent owner looking at its property, and the smile widened, a crack in the visage of myself, promising a world of pain. I ran. I didn't grab my coat from the back of the chair. I didn't wait to log out of the computer. I shoved myself away from the terminal, a strangled noise tearing from my throat, and I bolted. The librarian's sharp reprimand, the annoyed glances from other patrons, they were just distant noise, a radio playing in another country. The only thing that was real was the image burned into my mind. My own face, my own smile, twisted into a mask of predatory ownership from across the room. My feet hammered against the linoleum, then the carpet, then the concrete steps outside. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow, a shock to a system already overloaded. I didn't stop. I ran down the street, my lungs burning, my sides stitching. Every shop window was a threat. Every dark pane of glass on a parked car was an enemy. I kept my head down, my eyes fixed on the cracked pavement, refusing to see what might be looking back at me. It was with me. It wasn't in the mirror. It wasn't in the apartment. It was on me, latched onto me, an invisible parasite. The library had proven that. There was no escape. Running was useless. The thought stopped me dead in the middle of the sidewalk. I stood there, heaving, my hands on my knees. If I couldn't run from it, what was left? I couldn't go to my parents. I couldn't go to a friend's. I couldn't drag this thing, this sentient stain, into their lives. The choice was a dead end. There was nowhere to go. Nowhere but back. Back to the source. Back to the apartment. A new kind of resolve, brittle and tasting of panic, hardened in my chest. If I was going to be haunted, I would do it on my own turf. But not unprepared. Not again. The forum. The post I was reading before the message appeared. Imprint mirrors. It had mentioned weaknesses, folklore, old wives' tales, things I would have laughed at 2 days ago. I wasn't laughing now. I was clinging to them. Salt. One of the comments had mentioned salt. A barrier. A purifier. There was a 24-hour convenience store a few blocks away, its fluorescent lights, a lonely beacon in the dark. I walked, fast, my head on a swivel. The automatic door slid open with a soft whoosh. The air inside smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. It was aggressively normal. A teenager with headphones on barely looked up from his phone as I walked to the back aisle. I found what I was looking for. A big, round cardboard cylinder of iodized salt. It felt absurdly light in my hands. This was my weapon. A $1.50 container of kitchen seasoning against a thing that could edit the internet and wear my face. It was insane. It was all I had. The walk back to my building was the longest of my life. The key in my hand felt slick with sweat. Pushing it into the lock of my apartment door was an act of will. I expected resistance. I expected the door to be thrown open from the inside. But the lock turned with a simple mechanical click. I pushed the door open. The air inside was still and cold. Nothing looked out of place. The living room was just as I'd left it in my frantic escape. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, locking it. I shot the deadbolt home. The sound echoed in the silence. It didn't make me feel any safer. I didn't turn on the main lights. I didn't want to see the whole space clearly. I didn't want to see the wardrobe. I used the small lamp on the end table, casting long, deep shadows across the room. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I walked straight to the bedroom. I had to face it. There it was. The wardrobe. Sleek, dark wood. And the mirror, a perfect, placid rectangle of silvered glass. It reflected the dimly lit room, the unmade bed, the open door I had just walked through. It showed me my own shape, a tense silhouette holding a cylinder of salt. It looked completely normal, innocent. I ripped the metal spout off the salt container. Holding it like a weapon, I began to walk a wide circle around my bed. I poured a thick, unbroken line of white crystals onto the floorboards. The sound was a soft, steady hiss. The only noise in the room. The circle had to be perfect. Unbroken. That's what the post had said. I didn't know if it would work. I didn't know if any of this was real. But my hands were steady. My focus was absolute. I finished the circle. It was a white line of hope drawn on the floor. A border. With the barrier complete, I stepped carefully over the line and sat on the edge of my bed, my fortress. It felt fragile. Stupid. But it was a line I had drawn, an act of defiance. I took a breath, and I looked directly into the mirror. My reflection looked back. Just me, a pale, scared guy sitting on a bed inside a circle of salt. The room behind him in the glass was identical to the room I was in. I stared. I watched for any flicker of movement, any smile, any sign that the thing in the library was still there, looking out from behind my eyes. Nothing. 1 minute passed. Then 2. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. My own breathing. The reflection was perfect. It copied my every move. When I shifted my weight, it shifted its weight. When I blinked, it blinked. Maybe it was over. Maybe the shock of me fighting back, of me discovering it, had scared it off. The thought was a weak spark of hope. I kept watching. My eyes started to burn from the strain of not blinking. I focused on the background of the reflection. The wall. The poster. The closed bedroom door. Wait. I froze. The door. My bedroom door. I was looking at its reflection in the wardrobe mirror. I knew the real door, the one behind me, was shut. I had locked it myself. I could feel its solid presence at my back. But the door in the mirror, the doorknob was turning. It moved with an impossible, silent slowness. A polished brass knob, rotating degree by agonizing degree in a world made of glass. There was no sound, no click, no squeak. Just the steady, deliberate motion. My blood went cold. My gaze was locked on that reflected door. It couldn't be happening. I didn't dare turn my head to look at the real door. I didn't have to. I knew it was closed. I knew it was locked. In the mirror, the latch clicked free. The door began to swing inward. A dark gap appeared, widening into a slice of the hallway beyond. My hallway. But it was wrong. Darker. The light from the living room lamp didn't seem to reach it. It was a patch of absolute blackness. I sat motionless inside my salt circle. My one defense felt like a child's chalk drawing against a tidal wave. The door in the mirror swung open completely, banging silently against the reflected wall. And something came out of the darkness. It wasn't a person, it was a shape. A long, thin smear of shadow that peeled itself from the door frame. It moved with a liquid grace that made the hair on my arms stand up. It was boneless, formless, a spill of ink flowing across the reflected floorboards. It paid no attention to my reflection sitting on the bed. Not yet. It glided across the room, a silent predator exploring new territory. It flowed up the leg of my desk, its forms stretching and thinning. A tendril of shadow caressed the cover of a book, then slid over my laptop. It was claiming them. It was touching my life, piece by piece, in its silent, upside-down world. I watched, paralyzed, as it moved to my dresser. It paused over a framed photo of my sister and me, its shadow blanketing our smiling faces for a long, possessive moment. A coldness was seeping into the room. A deep, wet cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. It was the cold of a tomb. It passed right through the salt circle, right through my clothes, sinking deep into my bones. I started to shiver, my teeth chattering. But I couldn't make a sound. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the grotesque tour happening in the glass. It was marking its territory, and I was part of it. The shadow finished its inspection. It pooled on the floor in the center of the reflected room, and then it changed. It rose. It gathered itself upwards, stretching into a tall, vaguely man-shaped column of pure black. No features, no face, just a head-like shape on a torso of darkness. It turned. Its non-face, fixed on my reflection, sitting on the bed. Time seemed to stop. The apathetic exploration was over. Now it had a target. I saw my own reflected image flinch. I felt the terror of that other me in the glass. The shadow took a step, then another, its movements no longer fluid but jerky. Wrong. It was walking toward the bed. Toward me. I tried to scream. The sound was trapped in my throat, a choked, wet gasp. I scrambled backward on the bed, pushing myself against the headboard, as far from the mirror as I could get. The shadow reached the edge of the reflected bed. It raised a long, shadowy arm, and it lunged. It dove directly at my reflection. The moment the shadow form made contact with my image in the glass, a white-hot agony erupted on my scalp. A force, real and impossibly strong, grabbed a fistful of my hair and yanked. My head snapped back, slamming into the wooden headboard. A cry of pain ripped out of me. It was real. It was touching me. The barrier was nothing. I looked down. The pure white line of salt on the floor began to hiss. A thin, acrid smoke, like burning chemicals, curled up from the crystals. The salt was turning black, sizzling and dying, turning from a white line of protection into a black ring of scorched earth. It was burning out my one hope. I screamed, clawing at the invisible hand in my hair, the force pulling me, trying to drag me off the bed, toward the mirror. My fingers found nothing but my own hair. The pain was blinding. My vision swam with black spots. The thing in the mirror was holding my reflection down, and I was the one feeling it. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pressure vanished. My head fell forward, limp. I lay gasping on the mattress, my whole body trembling. The throbbing pain in my scalp was real. The smell of burnt salt hung heavy in the air. With a shuddering breath, I forced myself to look up. The mirror was quiet. The shadow was gone. In the reflection, the bedroom door was shut tight. The room in the glass was once again a perfect, still copy of my own. It was over. But it wasn't. My eyes focused on the surface of the mirror, right where my reflected face had been, right where the shadow had attacked. There, on the smooth, flawless glass, was something new. A flaw. It was tiny, a single point of impact from which a network of impossibly fine lines radiated outwards. A small, perfect spiderweb crack etched into the very surface of the glass. A scar, not on me, but on it. A wound I had somehow given it, or it had given itself, in its rage. And it was right over my face. The pain was an anchor, a hot, throbbing point on my scalp that chained me to reality. The smell of burning chemicals, of scorched salt, filled my lungs. I was on my bed, trembling, but I was alive. And the thing in the mirror was not. Not in the same way. The crack proved it. That tiny, star-shaped flaw in the glass. It wasn't just a reflection of me anymore. It was a thing with a body I had wounded, or it had wounded itself in its fury. It didn't matter. It was a sign. It's not invincible. The thought cut through the fear. It was a cold, sharp piece of steel. If it can be marked, it can be broken. A new resolve, ugly and born of pure rage, flooded my veins. I wasn't prey anymore. I was going to fight back. I was going to shatter that glass prison into 1,000,000 pieces. I scrambled off the bed, stumbling over the blackened ring of salt on the floor. It was useless now. A joke. My real weapon was in the hall closet. I yanked the door open, ignoring the squeal of the hinges. Behind a stack of old towels and a broken vacuum cleaner was my dad's old toolbox. I threw the towels aside and lifted the heavy steel box. The clang of metal on metal echoed in the small apartment. I flicked open the latches, wrenches, screwdrivers, pliers. I pushed them aside. There, at the bottom, a ball-peen hammer, a steel head, a hickory handle worn smooth with use. It felt heavy in my hand, solid, real. This was no line of salt. This was physics. This was force. I'm going to end this, I whispered, the words a raw scrape in my throat. My own voice sounded foreign, harder. I walked back into the bedroom, the hammer held tight in my right fist. My knuckles were white. Each step was deliberate. I was the hunter now. I was the one bringing the violence. I stopped just inside the doorway, my heart a heavy, pumping engine in my chest. I raised my eyes to the wardrobe, and I froze. My reflection stood there, watching me. It saw the hammer in my hand. It saw the fury on my face. It saw everything, but it was wrong. The me in the mirror, he wasn't holding a hammer. His right hand was empty, hanging loosely at his side. He wasn't breathing hard. He wasn't coiled like a spring. He just stood there, perfectly still. And he was looking at me, not like a reflection, but like a man looking through a window at a bug. There was a look on his face. Pity. No, that wasn't it. It was worse. It was a quiet, clinical, almost bored mockery. A look that said, "Really?" Releasey in size. Doubt, cold and slick, tried to worm its way back in. I crushed it. It was a trick. Another mind game. Trying to make me hesitate. I took a heavy step forward, the floorboard groaning under my weight. My reflection didn't move. It just watched me. Its calm was an insult, a violation. "You think this is funny?" I snarled, stepping closer still. The me in the mirror tilted his head slightly, a gesture of mild curiosity. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. I was 3 feet from the wardrobe now. The smell of burnt salt was stronger here. I could see the tiny crack in the glass right over my reflection's eye. A badge of honor. A target. I raised the hammer, positioning myself for a swing. I would start with the crack. I would smash that imperfection and then destroy the rest of it. As I lifted the hammer to my shoulder, my reflection acted. It didn't raise a weapon. It didn't brace for impact. It calmly, slowly, placed its hands behind its back, like a soldier at ease. Its posture straightened. It looked relaxed, confident. My entire body went rigid. This wasn't a reflection. Reflections mimic. They copy. They don't have their own will. They don't get to look bored while you're about to smash them to oblivion. This was a window, and the thing on the other side was playing with me. Rage, pure and blinding, took over. I let out a sound that wasn't a word, a guttural roar of frustration and hate. I bared my teeth, my whole body shaking with adrenaline, and the man in the mirror smiled. It wasn't a big smile. It was a small, tight, condescending smirk that didn't reach his eyes. It was the most infuriating, terrifying thing I had ever seen. He was completely separate from me, a different being wearing my skin. He saw my rage, and it amused him. That was it. That was the last straw. I screamed and lunged. I put all my weight, all my fear, all my anger into a single, desperate arc. The hammer swung through the air, aimed directly at my reflection's smiling face. The steel head was a blur. In that split second before impact, the reflection moved. Not away. Toward me, it lunged forward from its side of the glass. Its eyes were wide, and the smirk had exploded into a silent, maniacal grin of pure triumph. It wasn't attacking. It was reaching. Its left hand, the reflection of my free hand, shot forward and pressed flat against the inside of the mirror. The pale, perfect palm print appeared on the glass, directly over the point where the hammer was about to land. It was meeting the blow, welcoming it. The lights in the room flickered once, twice, then exploded. The pop of the filament was like a gunshot. Total, absolute darkness swallowed the room. The hammer hit, but it didn't hit glass. There was no shatter, no sharp, crystalline explosion. The impact was soft, yielding, wet, and warm. A sound ripped through the dark, a sickening crack. It was not the sound of a mirror breaking. It was the sound of a large bone snapping in two. A wave of unbelievable, white-hot agony shot up my left arm. A pain so immense it stole my breath and buckled my knees. I cried out, a high, thin sound of shock and torment. The hammer dropped from my nerveless right hand, thudding onto the floor. The absolute blackness began to fade. A sliver of pale, weak light from the hallway crept under the bedroom door, painting the floor in shades of gray. My eyes, wide with shock, slowly adjusted. I was still standing in front of the wardrobe. The mirror was intact, unbroken, not a single new crack. The smiling face was gone. My own terrified reflection stared back at me, a pale ghost in the gloom. My right hand, the one that held the hammer, was empty. My gaze drifted down to my other arm, my left arm. It was hanging at a bizarre, impossible angle, bent grotesquely sideways just below the elbow, the bone pushing visibly against the skin. It wasn't my arm anymore. It was a broken thing. Blood began to drip from the hammer on the floor. It wasn't a window. It wasn't a reflection. I had swung with my right hand at a target in the mirror, and the thing on the other side had reached through and broken my left arm. Pain. Not the sharp sting from the salt, not the throb on my scalp. This was a new god of pain, a white-hot sun that had risen inside my own bones. I sucked in a breath that was half a sob, and my entire world dissolved into that one searing point below my elbow. My knees gave out. I hit the floor hard, a dead weight, my good arm flailing to break the fall. My left arm, my broken arm, flopped uselessly beside me, a loose thing of meat and splintered bone, a grotesque parody of a limb. I didn't want to look at it, but I couldn't look away. In the weak gray light from the hallway, I could see the awful angle, the unnatural bend. The skin stretched tight over the sharp point of a shattered ulna. I scrambled backwards, away from the wardrobe, away from the mirror. I used my right hand and my heels to push, my body scraping against the wood floor. The movement sent fresh waves of lightning up my broken arm. A whimper escaped my lips, a pathetic animal sound. I squeezed my eyes shut. How? The hammer. My right hand. The swing. The target was the mirror, but the impact was my left arm. The logic didn't work. The physics was wrong. A plus B did not equal this impossible, agonizing C. It was like I had swung at a ghost and punched myself. My back hit the leg of the bed. I stopped, panting, curled on the floor like a bug. The hammer was still lying there, a dark shape near the wardrobe. Blood glistened on its head. My blood. My trembling right hand fumbled across the floor, searching for something, anything. An anchor. My fingers brushed against something cool and smooth. My phone. I must have dropped it when I went for the toolbox. I recoiled at first. The phone had been part of this. The calls, the texts. But now, it was just an object, a link to the world outside this room, a world where bones didn't break themselves, a world where reflections stayed on their side of the glass. I fumbled with it, the pain in my other arm making my fingers clumsy and weak. I nearly dropped it twice. My thumb smeared blood across the screen as I tried to press the home button. It didn't respond. The screen remained black. Dead, of course, just like the lights. Defeated, I let my head fall back against the bed frame. Tears of pain and frustration welled in my eyes. I was trapped, wounded and trapped. My phone was dead. The lights were out, and the thing in the mirror was waiting. Then the screen flickered to life. It wasn't the lock screen with the photo of my dog. It wasn't the keypad asking for a passcode. The screen glowed with a clinical white light, filled with black text. It had opened by itself, straight to a web page. A single, stark article on a site that looked like some cheap, fan-made encyclopedia. The logo was a stylized open eye. My heart hammered against my ribs. I held the phone steady with my shaking right hand. The title of the article was plain, centered at the top. The Echo Glass. My breath hitched. I started to read, my eyes devouring the words, desperate for an answer that made sense. The Echo Glass is not a portal, nor is it a prison for a conventional demonic entity. It is, for all intents and purposes, a sophisticated, organic recording device. It does not actively seek to harm. Instead, it passively absorbs the most powerful, obsessive, and violent emotions of the last individual to die in its presence. The glass then becomes a perfect, perpetual echo of that individual's psyche, replaying their patterns, their memories, and their final moments ad infinitum. It does not create a ghost. It becomes their echo. The words swam in front of my eyes. A recording device. An echo. Not a demon. Not a monster. A playback loop. The text messages. The pictures of me sleeping. The way it knew things. It wasn't some all-seeing evil. It was just playing back a recording. A recording of someone else. My thumb, slick with sweat, scrolled down. My arm screamed in protest as I shifted my weight. I ignored it. I had to know. The most well-documented case associated with this particular artifact involves a man named Arthur Penn. Penn was a stalker, driven by a severe case of erotomania, fixated on a woman who lived in his apartment building. His obsession was methodical. He started by gathering information online, then escalated to hacking her social media, her email, and eventually the smart devices in her home, lights, speakers, cameras. He used this access to psychologically torment her, mimicking her loved ones' voices, sending her images of herself and making her believe she was going insane. My stomach twisted. Every detail was a hammer blow. The hacked camera, the texts, the mockery. It wasn't personal. It was a script. And I had just stumbled onto the stage. I kept reading. A new, cold dread replacing the hot panic. Penn's campaign of terror culminated in a home invasion. The victim, whose name has been withheld by authorities, was forced to defend herself. In the ensuing struggle, Penn was killed. He was bludgeoned to death with a hammer in front of a large, full-length antique mirror he had gifted to her months earlier, a mirror he used to watch her remotely through a microscopic camera embedded in the frame. His final overriding emotion, a mix of possessive rage, triumph, and the shock of his own violent end, was permanently imprinted upon the glass. The hammer. The word hung in the air. I looked over at the dark shape on the floor, bludgeoned to death with a hammer. In front of the mirror, my gaze snapped back to the screen. The echo glass, now saturated with Arthur Penn's consciousness, began its loop. Subsequent owners of the mirror reported disturbances consistent with Penn's methods. Unsettling text messages, hacked devices, the unnerving feeling of being watched. The echo does not reason. It only repeats. It follows the stalker's playbook, from digital harassment to psychological warfare. The loop only deviates when the current target actively resists in a way that mirrors the original final confrontation. I fought back. I brought the hammer. I triggered the final act of his sick play. The violence. The Echo's ultimate goal is not murder, but the completion of its loop. It seeks to recreate the circumstances of its imprinting. When confronted with physical aggression, the Echo will respond in kind, its sole purpose to fulfill the violent finale it is forced to eternally relive. It wasn't trying to break the mirror, it was trying to break me. My lunge with the hammer wasn't an attack on it. It was my cue. The cue for the play's climax. The part where the hammer comes down. The part where a body gets broken. The phone felt impossibly heavy. The article had explained everything and made it 1,000 times worse. This wasn't a battle I could win. I wasn't fighting a creature with a will of its own. I was fighting a memory. A scar left on the world. A deadly, violent history lesson set on repeat. And I was the final pop quiz. My whole body went rigid. The play. It was his play. It was always his play. And what happens at the end of a play? The actors take a bow. The curtain falls. What happens at the end of this one? Slowly, shakily, I lifted my head. I forced my eyes away from the sick, comforting glow of the phone screen and looked across the dark room. The wardrobe stood there. A black monolith. The mirror was a perfect, flat rectangle of deeper blackness. My reflection stared back at me. A pale, wild-eyed woman huddled on the floor, one arm held at a gruesome angle. She was me. Every terrified line on her face was mine. But something was wrong. Behind her. Behind me. A smudge in the darkness. A shape that didn't belong. It was like a double exposure on an old film photograph. Faint. Watery. But it was there. The shape of a man's face. It was partially superimposed over my own reflection's shoulder. Gaunt, with hollow eyes and a wide, open mouth. His features were twisted in a silent, unending scream. It was a face of pure agony and rage. The face of Arthur Penn I knew, trapped in his final moment. He was there, the ghost in the machine. The Echo. He was screaming, but there was no sound. I was staring at the man whose obsession was trying to kill me, the man whose memory had just shattered my arm. Then, the phone in my hand vibrated. A new notification lit up the screen, pulling my gaze down for a single, fatal second. It was a text message. From my own number, my thumb, acting on its own, swiped it open. One line of text glowed on the screen. His script is over. A pause. Then 3 more words appeared, as if being typed in real time. Now it's my turn. A chill, so profound it felt like death itself, shot through my body. Turn? Whose turn? The Echo was just a replay. It couldn't. I looked up from the phone, back to the mirror. The screaming face of Arthur Penn was gone. Vanished. There was only my reflection. She was no longer pale, no longer terrified. The fear in her eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp intelligence. She looked calm. She looked aware. And as I watched, frozen in a horror beyond anything I had ever known, the corners of my reflection's mouth turned up. It was a small, tight, condescending smile, a smile of absolute victory. The phone slipped from my good hand, clattering to the floor. The screen went dark. The light was gone. The condescending smile remained, etched on my own face in the mirror. It wasn't a script, not anymore. The text message wasn't from Arthur Penn's obsessive, looping memory. It was a declaration, a change in management. Penn's Echo was the grub, the larva stage. It had done its job, terrorized the host, weakened the defenses. And now, the butterfly had emerged. Something older, something smarter, something that had been patiently waiting inside the glass. It had hijacked the Echo. It had used Penn's playbook as a smokescreen, and I had fallen for it. The web article, the convenient rush of answers. It was all a trap, a distraction. The magician showing you his right hand while his left hand pulls a knife. My broken arm was a hot, screaming wire of pure agony, but a cold, clear thought cut through the pain. I have to break it. I have to shatter the glass. Whatever this thing is, the mirror is its anchor, its door. My mind latched onto that one single purpose. It was the only rung on a ladder sinking into a bottomless pit. I gritted my teeth, ignoring the wetness on my cheeks, and used my right hand and my heels to push myself up against the bed frame. Every movement sent a fresh spike of fire up my left side. I choked back a sob. It didn't matter. The pain didn't matter. Only the mirror. The hammer lay on the floor near the wardrobe, a dark, ugly shape. The final piece of Arthur Penn's play. Now it would be the first piece of mine. With my good hand clutching the bedspread, I dragged my body into a kneeling position, then a pained, unsteady crouch. The room spun. Black spots danced in my vision. I waited a second, my breath coming in ragged pants. I could feel its eyes on me, the reflection's eyes. It hadn't moved. It was just watching me, that victorious smirk unwavering. It knew I was wounded. It was enjoying the show. I took a shaky step forward. Then another. My bare feet were slick with my own sweat. I reached the hammer and bent down, my whole body trembling with the effort. My fingers closed around the wooden handle. It felt heavy, final. I straightened up, the hammer held tight in my right fist. My only good hand. It would have to be enough. I looked at the mirror, at myself, at the thing wearing my face. "Your turn's over," I whispered, the words tearing out of my dry throat. And then it happened. It wasn't fast. It wasn't violent. There was no crackle of energy, no shatter of glass. The reflection, my perfect copy, simply took a step forward. It stepped through the surface of the mirror. The glass rippled for a half second, like the surface of a black pond disturbed by a thrown stone. Then it was flat and hard again. But she was no longer in it. She was in the room with me. Standing 3 feet away from the wardrobe, on the wooden floor where only my shadow should have been. A perfect, solid duplicate. Wearing my torn t-shirt, my sweatpants. A smear of my blood was on her cheek. Her left arm hung at the same sickening, broken angle as mine. But her eyes were holes. They were my eyes, my shade of blue, but there was nothing behind them. No fear, no anger, no soul. Just a flat, dark, knowing emptiness. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of placid curiosity. She was here. Air clogged in my throat. My heart stopped. The hammer suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. This wasn't possible. The laws of the world, of physics, of everything I knew were tearing apart in front of me. I was staring at myself. And she was staring back. The copy didn't lunge. It didn't scream. It did something worse. It began, slowly, to explore. It turned its head, its movements fluid and natural, and looked around my bedroom. Its empty eyes slid over my crumpled bedsheets, the stack of paperbacks on my nightstand, the poster of a band I loved tacked to the wall. It was like a tourist in my life. It took a slow, deliberate step towards my desk. It ran its fingers, my fingers, along the cheap wood laminate. It picked up a snow globe I'd had since I was a kid, a gift from my grandmother. It held it up, watching the fake snow swirl around the tiny ceramic house inside. Its face was blank, unreadable. Then, with a casual flick of its wrist, it dropped the globe. It hit the floor and shattered. Glass and water and glitter sprayed across the wood. The copy didn't even glance down. It was taking inventory. It was touching my things. My life. It turned its gaze back to me. It took a deep breath, its chest rising and falling just like mine. "Real air," it said. The voice was mine. Every tone, every inflection. Hearing it come from that thing sent a wave of nausea through me. So profound, I nearly buckled. "This body," it continued, looking down at itself, flexing the fingers of its right hand. It touched its own face, its own hair. Also real. The empty eye settled on my ruined left arm, then glanced at its own identical, broken limb. It didn't even flinch. It felt nothing. A small, cold smile touched its lips again. A look of profound satisfaction. It was assessing its new vessel, and it approved. Flaws and all. "It will heal," it said, its voice a calm, chilling murmur. That was it. The breaking point. The icy terror in my veins caught fire, turning into pure, raw rage. This thing, this parasite, wasn't just going to kill me. It was going to replace me. It was going to live in my skin, touch my things, heal my bones, and walk out of this room as me. And I would be... where? In the glass? Gone? No! I choked out, raising the hammer. Get out! The thing's smile widened. It had been waiting for this. It lunged. It was impossibly fast. It crossed the space between us in a single bound. I swung the hammer wildly, a clumsy, one-armed arc. It ducked under the swing with a grace I didn't possess, its good right arm shooting out, fingers clamping around my throat. I gagged, the impact slamming me backward. Its grip was iron, not the grip of a woman my size. It was something else. Ancient, strong. The air was cut off from my lungs. Black spots exploded behind my eyes again. My left arm slammed against its body in the collision, and a white-hot nova of pain detonated from my elbow. I screamed. A choked, wet sound. The copy didn't react. It just squeezed harder. But it wasn't trying to kill me, not like this. Its inhuman strength was pulling me, dragging me, my heels scraping against the floorboards, leaving streaks through the spilled water and glitter from the snow globe. I knew where it was taking me. Back to the wardrobe, back to the mirror. It wanted to trade places. It wanted to shove me through the glass, back into the black nothingness it had just escaped. My survival instinct screamed louder than the pain. My right hand, still gripping the hammer, came up, and I slammed the steel head into the side of its head. The sound was a dull, sickening thud. A human skull would have cracked. A human body would have fallen. The copy barely flinched. Its head jerked to the side, but its grip on my throat didn't loosen. Its empty eyes locked back onto mine, and for the first time, I saw an emotion in them. Annoyance. It was swatting a fly. I was losing. I was dying. It was dragging me closer and closer to the mirror. I could see our reflection now, the two of us locked in a grotesque struggle. Me, face purple, eyes wide with terror. It, calm, determined, a predator securing its prey. It had me. My legs were weak, my vision was tunneling. With the last atom of strength in my body, I did the only thing I could. I stopped resisting the pull. I let my legs go limp and threw my entire weight forward and down, using its own momentum against it. It was not expecting it. It stumbled, its balance broken for a split second. Its grip on my throat loosened just enough for me to gasp a ragged breath. In that one moment, I wasn't trying to win. I was just trying to create space. I shoved with my entire being, my good hand pushing against its chest, my shoulder driving into its stomach. It wasn't enough to break free, but it was enough to change our trajectory. Instead of going toward the mirror, we crashed sideways. The copy's back hit the corner of my desk with a loud, sickening crack of splintering wood. It screamed. But the sound wasn't my voice. It wasn't human. It was a high-pitched, digital shriek, a sound like grinding metal and sizzling static tearing through a cheap speaker. It was the sound of a machine breaking. The grip on my throat vanished. The copy crumpled to the floor, twitching, its mouth open, that horrible, synthetic shriek still pouring out. At the exact same instant, a sound split the air from across the room. Crack! It was louder than before, sharper. I scrambled back, my chest heaving, and stared at the wardrobe. Another crack had appeared on the surface of the mirror. This one was bigger. It started from the center, a jagged lightning bolt fracture that spread out halfway to the edge. The glass around it seemed to warp and distort. The thing on the floor convulsed one last time, the inhuman shriek cutting off abruptly, and then it lay still. The room was silent, except for the sound of my own desperate, gasping breaths. It was still there, motionless, but it was there, and the mirror was broken, wounded. I didn't win. I hadn't won anything. I had just heard it, and now it knew I could. The silence was worse than the shriek. It pressed in on me, heavy and dead. The thing on the floor, my perfect copy, was a heap of limbs and torn fabric. Still, too still. But the crack in the mirror, a jagged bolt of lightning now bisecting the silvered surface, told me a truth my screaming mind was just beginning to grasp. They were connected. That thing on the floor wasn't the source. It was a projection. A limb. Hitting it was like punching the arm of a man who was strangling you. Painful for him, maybe. But the real target was his head. His heart. The mirror was its heart. The thought was cold and clear, a shard of ice in the furnace of my terror. I had to get to the mirror. I had to finish it. The hammer was still in my right hand, the wood slick with sweat, the steel head feeling like an anchor. I looked from the motionless body on the floor to the wardrobe. 10 feet away. A lifetime. It twitched. Just a finger. Flexing. Then another. Its head lifted an inch off the floor, the movement jerky, unnatural, like a puppet pulled by unseen strings. Its empty eyes found mine. I turned my back on it. It was the hardest thing I've ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to watch it, to keep it in my sight. But there was no time. I took one step toward the wardrobe. My bare foot crunched on the glitter and glass of my grandmother's snow globe. The pain was distant, unimportant. Wait. The voice was mine, but layered with that metallic static, a corrupted audio file. It scraped the air. It came from the thing behind me, the thing now struggling to rise. It was pushing itself up with its one good arm. I ignored it. Another step. The hammer felt heavier. "You break that glass," the voice rasped, losing some of the static, sounding more like me, more desperate. "You kill me. You kill yourself." I stopped. My hand tightened on the hammer. Was it lying? A last-ditch effort to save itself? It was a parasite. It wouldn't share a fate with its host. It couldn't. "We're linked now," it said, and I heard it drag itself a few inches across the floor. A wet, scraping sound. "It took a piece of you to make me. A real piece. When the glass breaks, that piece is gone forever. You'll be incomplete." I stood frozen, my back to it, staring at the scarred reflection in the cracked mirror ahead. I saw my own terrified face, my blood-streaked cheek, my ruined arm. My eyes were wide, wild, my chest heaved. I could hear it getting closer. I had to choose. I had to be sure. I looked deeper into the mirror, past the cracks, past my own frantic reflection, and I saw her. It was just for a second. A flicker. In the largest, unbroken piece of the mirror, my own reflection changed. The terror on its face dissolved, replaced by a look of pure, agonizing desperation. Its mouth opened in a silent scream. Its good hand came up and pressed against the inside of the glass, fingers spread wide. It was crying, pleading. That was me. The real me, trapped in there. The thing scrambling on the floor behind me wasn't made from a piece of me. It was the cage that held me. It was the warden of my prison. The lie it just told wasn't to save itself. It was to save its new, stolen life. "You'll never get out again," I whispered to the thing behind me, my words aimed at the weeping ghost in the glass, my resolve hardened from ice into steel. "No!" The shriek was pure, a human sound of panic this time. My voice. It knew I had seen the truth. I heard it lunge, a frantic scramble of limbs on the wooden floor. I didn't have to turn around. I could feel the space behind me disappearing. I could feel the air shifting as it closed the distance. It was fast. Faster than before. Its rage and desperation had given it a new surge of strength. The back of my neck prickled. A cold wave washed over my skin, the kind of absolute cold that signals a presence right behind you. I saw it in my peripheral vision, a blur of movement. A hand. My hand, reaching for my shoulder. Its fingers were inches away. I could feel its breath, a puff of cold, dead air against my hair. There was no more time. I closed my eyes. I shut out the reflection, the room, the thing about to grab me. I put every ounce of fear, every shred of pain, every memory of the last few hours into my arm. I thought of its smirk in the mirror. I thought of the shattered snow globe. I thought of my own face screaming silently from inside its glass prison. I swung the hammer. It wasn't a clean arc. It was a clumsy, desperate, one-armed heave. A prayer made of muscle and bone. The impact was absolute. It was not the sound of breaking glass. It was an explosion, a sonic boom that shook the floorboards and rattled my teeth. The world went white and deafeningly loud. Crack-ca-ca-ca-ca-ca-ca-ca. A scream tore through the explosion. Not one voice. 1,000, 1,000,000. Men, women, children, all screaming at once. A tidal wave of synthetic digital agony that clawed at the inside of my skull. It was a sound that didn't belong in the world. The sound of a server farm being set on fire. Of 1,000 souls being deleted at once. The hand that was about to touch my shoulder vanished. The cold presence behind me was gone, sucked into a vacuum. The monstrous scream climbed to an impossible pitch, held for one agonizing second, and then cut off into perfect, ringing silence. I opened my eyes. The mirror was gone. The wardrobe door was a black, empty frame filled with splinters of wood. The floor was a glittering carpet of 1,000,000 tiny shards of glass. Of the copy, there was nothing. Not a trace. It had simply ceased to be. The room was still. The only sounds were the faint tinkle of a single piece of glass hitting the floor and my own ragged, heaving breaths, sucking in air that finally felt real. My arm felt like it was on fire. My body trembled uncontrollably, the adrenaline abandoning me all at once, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of pain and exhaustion. I had won. It was over. My legs gave out. I crumpled to my knees, my good hand landing in the sea of broken glass. I didn't even feel the sting. I just knelt there, head bowed, gasping, shaking, alive, safe. My gaze drifted across the floor, through the wreckage of my room. My phone. It was lying near the leg of the bed where I dropped it earlier. The screen was spider-webbed with cracks, but it was on. It was bright. A small, familiar beacon in the darkness. Maybe I could call someone. The police. An ambulance. The thought was slow, stupidly simple. I crawled toward it, my body screaming with every movement. My fingers closed around the plastic shell. I lifted it. The screen was in front-facing camera mode. I saw my face. A mess of sweat, tears, and drying blood. My hair was matted. My eyes were bloodshot and huge. But it was my face. Free. I almost smiled. Then I saw it. It happened slowly. Not a flicker. A fade. From the impossibly deep black of the pupils in my on-screen reflection, something shifted. 2 points of light. They grew, sharpened, coalesced. They were eyes. A second pair of eyes, looking out from inside my own. They were not my terrified eyes. They were not the copy's empty holes. They were glowing, ancient, and filled with an intelligence so vast and so cruel, it made my blood run cold. They opened fully, 2 burning embers in the darkness of my own reflection. And they stared right at me,